content of some, and I want to underscore the word some, not all, rock music, which it has been pointed out by a number of people, has really broken new ground as to the content of music and the lyrics that are used in music. There have, I suppose, always been cases of songs that are suggestive in one way or another. However, certain rock music that is now being sold deals very explicitly with sexual subjects. Some music glorifies violence of in various forms, sexual violence. Some music advocates the use of drugs, drug abuse, and so on. So the reason for this hearing is not to promote any legislation. Indeed, I don't know of any suggestion that any legislation be passed, but to simply provide a forum for airing the issue itself, for ventilating the issue, for bringing it out in the public domain. The concern is that the public at large should be aware of the existence of this kind of music and the fact that it is now available to kids and that kids of all ages are able to buy it. It's my understanding that various private groups have been holding discussions with people who are in the music publishing and the music industry to try to achieve some sort of understanding with respect to the labeling of records so that at least the whole family knows what's in them and not just the child who buys the record. That seems to me to be a reasonable suggestion. But the point of this hearing is not for me to make any particular suggestions, but to simply provide a forum so that the whole issue can be brought to the attention of the American people. I want to say a word about this hearing. We have a number of witnesses. They have all been given specific time limits for their testimony, as is always the case in Commerce Committee hearings. It's going to be necessary for me to enforce those time limits strictly, and therefore I would ask the witnesses to do so voluntarily. Your prepared texts of your statements will be included in the record automatically. You don't even have to ask for permission for them to be in the record. They will be included in the record automatically. So you don't have to take some of your time asking permission. It will be done. With respect to the content of the statements, to describe what's in the music that's in question will, I'm sure, require some witnesses to use words and describe things that will shock the sensitivities of many of us in this room and many who are watching these proceedings on television. And I just wanted to warn you of that in advance so that, you know, if children have the TV on, they can, or their parents can know what's in store for them. I want witnesses to be able to inform the Senate of their points of view and the facts as they know them. But I would also hasten to say to witnesses that when you go beyond description and needlessly use expressions that may be in bad taste, this really is a hearing of a Senate committee, and this is the government of the people of this country. It's really theirs, and I would hope that standards would be used to the extent possible in your discussions and in your testimony, which bears that in mind. Senator Hollings.
Mr. Chairman, I first want to commend our Parents Music Resource Center group for bringing this to the nationals, or let's say nation's attention. I've had the opportunity to attend a showing, you might say, a presentation of this pawn rock, as they call it. In the test of pornography, one of the things to look at is that it does not have any redeeming social value. There could be an exception here because having attended that presentation, the redeeming social value, I find that it's inaudible. I have a hard time understanding it. And Paul, since I traveled the country for 3 years and they said they couldn't understand me, maybe I could make a good rock star. I don't know. But in all candor, I would tell you it's outrageous filth. And we've got to do something about it. I take the tempered approach and commend it of our distinguished chairman. And yet I would make the exception that if I could find some way constitutionally to do away with it, I would. I noticed on the media yesterday morning something about a tax bill. I've looked into that. That does not pertain to this particular hearing. But we do know that the matter of the broadcast airwaves gives more or less the most limited of protected speech because the airwaves do belong to the American public. They invade the privacy of the homes, and we do know under the law of pornography that children are given a special protection. I want everyone to know I'm keeping that foremost in mind and asking the best of constitutional minds if there's some way in the world to try to limit it as we go along with the voluntary labeling. I commend those who are now beginning to label. That's what we would like to have, truth in labeling. I don't think we can outlaw pornography. Don't have that in mind at all. But to take 6 to 7 hours, that's the average listening time, Senator, as I understand, by the youngsters of this particular rock porn and rock music and everything else of that kind, or let's say rock music and intersperse it with the pornography, is a matter of national concern. And is something that we've got to give some kind of attention to within the constrictions of free speech. So I'll be looking from this senator's standpoint not just to bring pressures, but to try to see if there is some constitutional provisions, a tax or approach that can be used under Congress to limit this outrageous filth, violence, suggestions, suicide, everything else in the Lord's world that you wouldn't think of, or certainly the writers and framers of our First Amendment never have perhaps heard in their time, never considered the broadcast airwaves, and certainly that being piped into people's homes willy-nilly over the air. So I'll be listening closely. I'm sorry we have also another defense appropriations markup that I must attend here shortly. I'll be in and out, but that's not because I'm not interested. We're very interested in trying our dead level best to limit as best we can for the tender young heirs of America, controlling it from the rock porn that will be presented here, I guess, in a few minutes again. I've heard some of it, and I'm sure you have.
Senator Trible.
Mr. Chairman, a brief statement, if I may. More than 2,300 years ago, Plato recognized that music is a powerful force in our lives, that music forms character and therefore plays an important part in determining social and political issues. In Plato's words, when modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state change with them. Perhaps Daniel O'Connell, the 18th century Irish nationalist, expressed it best when he said, "Let me write the songs of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." Our culture powerfully affects individual character. When we're constantly confronted by that which is coarse, we become coarsened. Repeated exposure to song lyrics describing rape, incest, sexual violence, and perversion is like sandpaper to the soul. it rubs raw one's sensibilities, resulting in a state of emotional numbness. In the words of George Will, one becomes literally demoralized. Now, the effects of such lyrics on a well-adjusted child may not be cataclysmic. Rather, the emotional damage is more subtle. The effect on a troubled child, however, can be disastrous, pushing that child over the emotional precipice. And to the extent that individual attitudes are influenced, this becomes a very real social problem. The linkage between experience, thought, and action necessarily leads to concern about the consequences for society. And it demands a response from each of us, not as self-appointed guardians of the national morality, as some would suggest, but as concerned citizens and leaders of a great and lasting republic. To paraphrase John Donne, any man's death or harm diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind. Likewise, we're all involved in the American social and political experiment. And what damages our children and diminishes their future harms us all. The mere announcement of this hearing led to cries of censorship. The issue before us, however, is not censorship. Censorship, according to the classic legal definition, is the review of publications for the purpose of prohibiting the publication, distribution, or production of material deemed objectionable as obscene, indecent, or immoral. The key word in that definition is prohibition. The issue before us is not prohibition, but rather the exercise of moral suasion, the labeling of offensive lyrics, and other efforts aimed at encouraging restraint regarding the time, place, and manner of certain speech in question. That does not constitute censorship. The First Amendment is not under attack here. The Constitution is many things to many people, but they do not serve it well, those who thoughtlessly invoke its words to defend their every word and action. Mr. Chairman, I'm a senator, and I'm also a father. Being a parent of 2 small children is the most important task I will ever have. If I were to serve in Congress for decades and be acclaimed a great statesman, I will have failed in my life if I fail to serve my children's best interest. To protect them during their youth, to provide for their needs, to encourage their education, these are all important. But I will be measured, indeed we will all be measured, by how we teach our children right from wrong, by whether we impart respect for self and for others, and whether we pass on to the future generations a sense of moral and ethical principle. That's what this hearing is all about. I believe this may well be the most important hearing conducted by the Commerce Committee this year. I look forward to working with you and my colleagues on this committee, the Parents Music Resource Center, the recording and broadcast industries, and responsible citizens everywhere to respond to this very real problem. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Trible. Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank you and commend you for calling this hearing. Because my wife has been heavily involved in the evolution of this issue, I have gained quite a bit of familiarity with it, and I've really gained an education in what is involved. The 2 most important things I've learned, which have changed my initial attitude to this whole concern, are, number 1, the proposals made by those concerned about this problem do not involve a government role of any kind whatsoever. They're not asking for any form of censorship or regulation of speech in any manner, shape, or form. What they are asking for is whether or not the music industry can show some self-restraint and working together in a manner similar to that used by the movie industry, whether or not they can come up with a voluntary guide system for parents who wish to exercise what they believe to be their responsibilities to their children, to try to prevent their children from being exposed to material that is not appropriate for them. The second thing I've learned over the past several months is that the kind of material in question is really very different from the kind of material which has caused similar controversies in past generations. It really is very different, and I think those who have not become familiar with this material will realize that fact when they see some of the examples that involve extremely popular groups that get an awful lot of play, some of the most popular groups around now. I was interested when the hearing was first announced to have the opportunity to ask the heads of the record companies whether or not they felt some responsibility. I am told by staff that every single one of the chief executive officers invited to participate chose to decline that invitation. I fully understand that, but I wanted to note that fact for the record, and I think that they should take a look at what their companies are doing and just ask themselves as human beings whether or not this is the way they want to spend their lives, if this is the way they want to earn a living, if this is the kind of contribution they want to make to the society in which we live. No one's proposing or contemplating the government answering that question for them. But as citizens of this country, it seems to me we have the right to ask them whether or not they wish to answer the question, and I hope that they will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gore, thank you very much. I want to point out that I have received a letter from Mr. Robert McConnell, Vice President of CBS, stating that he received the invitation to appear here too late to prepare his testimony, and that he is very interested in the hearings and would be willing to appear at some later hearing. Senator Rockefeller. Senator Gorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to hear the witnesses, and I do not need to hold us off any further by any opening statement.
The first witness is Senator Paula Hawkins, who has joined us here at the committee's desk. Senator Hawkins, delighted to have you here.
I commend you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for holding this all-important hearing. As chairman of the Children, Family, Drug, and Alcoholism Subcommittee, this is a subject that I am very familiar with. The wealth of a nation is measured by its children. We decided as a committee in the last 18 months to hold hearings discussing the role of the media in drug abuse and prevention and education. There we learned that by the 4th grade, children have already decided whether or not to take drugs. We asked the question, does the media behave responsibly in portraying values to our children? In the second hearing, the issue of alcohol advertising in the broadcast media, we weighed heavily the First Amendment considerations involved when the media portray behavior which many Americans find objectionable. Today we're raising the question, how far should society go to keep young children from being exposed to images and words which may run counter to parents' values and beliefs in decency? It's the parent we blame if the child gets on drugs. It's the parent we blame if the child commits suicide. It's the parent we blame if the child burns down a building. Just how much guilt can we place on these parents without giving them some assistance? And as Senator Gore has so eloquently stated, it's been 30 years since Elvis first shook his hips on the Ed Sullivan Show, and here we are talking about the content of rock music and its presentation in records, on album covers, and advertising, concerts, and in rock video. Much has changed since Elvis' seemingly innocent times. Subtlety, suggestions, and innuendo have given way to overt expressions and descriptions of often violent sexual acts, drug taking, and flirtations with the occult. The record album covers, to me, are self-explanatory. And I'd like to show just a sampling. of a record cover. Pyromania, no question. Burn a building, burn, burn, burn. Porn rock. It's my life, and I love sex. With obviously a lot of fire and chains and other objectionable tools of gratification in some twisted minds. There is no question about the message, and I still hear art is art, and in America artists are supposed to be free to express themselves. And who has the responsibility to answer that question? Parents? The music industry? The government? I speak as a legislator, I speak as a parent, a veteran who has brought up 3 children through adolescence. I know the temptations dangled in front of teenagers, and I know the frustrations parents experience all through this process. The sense of hopelessness when you get the feeling your child won't listen to you. There is in these times often a need to look to a force outside yourself for help. The question we must ask is, should the force be the government? And that's what this hearing is designed to determine. I believe will be helpful before we proceed any further to get an idea of what it is we're talking about. One criticism of the rock industry is the way it portrays values in rock videos, which are viewed by the kids, while we're all busy here being legislators. There are suggestions that the move to label rock albums be extended to videos as well. I don't watch much television. I'm not sure how many of my colleagues get much opportunity to watch any of the music video shows now available on cable and free TV. I brought along 2 videos from which to choose, which I believe are representative of the kind of presentation which have caused the furor. We will show them. The first is by the group Van Halen. That video is called...
Wait a second, Senator Hawkins, just a minute. No, this is a very large crowd today. We have allowed people in beyond the capacity of this room. We're not going to have any demonstrations, no applause, no demonstrations of any kind.
I thank the chairman. The title of that tape was Hot for Teacher. And we will give each senator a copy of the words. They'll promise not to distribute them beyond their own possession. The next video is by the group Twisted Sister, and we'll show you a brief portion of that. These are very popular videos. Mr. Chairman, I think picture's worth 1,000 words. This issue is too hot not to cool down. Parents are asking for assistance, and I hope we always remember that no success in life would compensate for failure in the home.
Senator Hawkins, thank you very much. The next witness or witnesses, Susan Baker, Mrs. James Baker, and the Parents Music Resource Center. What you've got here during the witnesses. Mrs. Baker, thank you very much for being with us. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would like to thank you and the committee for the opportunity to testify before you.
If you could speak directly into the microphone. Thank you.
Before I begin, I would like to introduce the president of the PMRC, Pam Hauer, and our treasurer, Sally Nevius. The Parents Music Resource Center was organized in May of this year by mothers of young children who are very concerned by the growing trend in music toward lyrics that are sexually explicit, excessively violent, or glorify the use of drugs and alcohol. Our primary purpose is to educate and inform parents about this alarming trend, as well as to ask the industry to exercise self-restraint. It is no secret that today's rock music is a very important part of adolescents and teenagers' lives. It always has been, and we don't question their right to have their own music. We think that's important. They use it to identify and give expression to their feelings, their problems, their joys, sorrows, loves, and values. It wakes them up in the morning, and it's in the background as they get dressed for school. It's played on the bus. It's listened to in the cafeteria during lunch. It's played as they do their homework. They even watch it on MTV now. It's danced to at parties and puts them to sleep at night. Because anything that we're exposed to that much has some influence on us, we believe that the music industry has a special responsibility as the message of songs goes from the suggestive to the blatantly explicit. As Ellen Goodman states in her recent column, Rock Ratings, and I quote, "The outrageous edge of rock and roll has shifted its focus from Elvis's pelvis to the saw protruding from Blackie Lawless's codpiece on a Wasp album. Rock lyrics have turned from 'I can't get no satisfaction' to 'I'm going to force you at gunpoint to eat me alive,'" end quote. The material we're concerned about cannot be compared with Louie Louie, Cole Porter, Billie Holiday, etc. Cole Porter's "The Birds Do It, the Bees Do It" can hardly be compared with Wasp, "I F-U-C-K like a beast." There is a new element of vulgarity, violence, and brutality to women that is unprecedented. While a few outrageous recordings have always existed in the past, the proliferation of songs glorifying rape, sadomasochism, incest, the occult, and suicide by a growing number of bands illustrates this escalating trend that is alarming. Some have suggested that the records in question are only a minute element in this music. However, these records are not few and have sold millions of copies. Like Prince's "Darling Nikki," about masturbation, sold over 10 million copies. Judas Priest, the one about forced oral sex at gunpoint, has sold over 2 million copies. Quiet Riot, Mental Health, has some songs about explicit sex, over 5 million copies. Motley Crue, "Shout at the Devil," which contains violence and brutality to women, over 2 million copies. Some say there's no cause for concern. We believe there is. Teen pregnancies and teenage suicide rates are at epidemic proportions today. The Nedeker report states that in the USA, we have the highest teen pregnancy rate of any developed country. 96 out of 1,000 teenage girls become pregnant. Rape is up 7% in the latest statistics. And the suicide rates of youth between 16 and 24 has gone up 300% in the last 3 decades, while the adult level has remained the same. There certainly are many causes for these ills in our society, but it's our contention that the pervasive messages aimed at children which promote and glorify suicide, rape, sadomasochism, and so on have to be numbered among the contributing factors. Some rock artists actually seem to encourage teen suicide. Ozzy Osbourne sings Suicide Solution. Blue Oyster Cult sings Don't Fear the Reaper. AC/DC sings Shoot to Thrill. Just last week in Center Point, a small Texas town, a young man took his life while listening to the music of AC/DC. He was not the first. Now that more and more elementary school children are becoming consumers of rock music, we think it's imperative to discuss this question. What can be done to help parents who want to protect their children from these messages if they want to? Today, parents have no way of knowing the content of music products that their children are buying. While some album covers are sexually explicit or depict violence, many others give no clue as to the contents. One of the top tunes today is Morris Day and the Time, Jungle Love. If you go to buy the album Ice Cream Castles to get Jungle Love, you also get If the Kid Can't Make You Come, Nobody Can, a sexually explicit song. The pleasant cover picture of the members of the band gives no hint that it contains material that's not appropriate for young consumers. Our children are faced with so many choices today. What is available to them through the media is historically unique. The Robert Johnson study on teen environments states that young people themselves often feel that they have A, too many choices to make, B, too few structured means for arriving at decisions, and C, too little help to get there. We believe something can be done, and Tipper Gore will discuss a possible solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker. Mrs. Gore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are asking the recording industry to voluntarily assist parents who are concerned by placing a warning label on music products inappropriate for younger children due to explicit sexual or violent lyrics. The Parents Music Resource Center originally proposed a categorical rating system for explicit material. After many discussions with the record industry, we recognize some of the logistical and economic problems and have adjusted our original suggestions accordingly. We now propose one generic warning label to inform consumers in the marketplace about lyric content. The labels would apply to all music. We have asked the record companies voluntarily label their own products and assume responsibility for making those judgments. We ask the record industry to appoint a one-time panel to recommend a uniform set of criteria which could serve as a policy guide for the individual companies. Those individual recording companies would then, in good faith, agree to adhere to this standard and make decisions internally about which records should be labeled according to the industry criteria. We have also asked that lyrics for labeled music products be available to the consumer before purchase in the marketplace. Now it's important to clearly state what our proposal is not. A voluntary labeling is not censorship. Censorship implies restricting access or suppressing content. This proposal does neither. Moreover, it involves no government action. Voluntarily labeling in no way infringes upon First Amendment rights. Labeling is little more than truth in packaging, by now a time-honored principle in our free enterprise system. And without labeling, parental guidance is virtually impossible. Most importantly, the committee should understand the Parents Music Resource Center is not advocating any federal intervention or legislation whatsoever. The excesses that we are discussing were allowed to develop in the marketplace, and we believe the solutions to these excesses should come from the industry who has allowed them to develop, and not from the government. The issue here is larger than violent and sexually explicit lyrics. It is one of ideas and ideals, freedoms and responsibility in our society. Clearly, there is a tension here, and in a free society, there always will be. We are simply asking that these corporate and artistic rights be exercised with responsibility, with sensitivity, and some measure of self-restraint, especially since young minds are at stake. We are talking about preschool pre-teenagers and young teenagers having access to this material. That is our point of departure and our concern. Now, Mr. Chairman, one point we've already made, the material which has caused the concern is new and different. It's not just a continuation of controversies of past generations. To illustrate this point, we would like to show a slide presentation. And to this end, I turn the microphone over to Jeff Ling, who is a consultant to our group, and he will show you some of the material that we're talking about. Thank you.
Mr. Lang?
Mr. Chairman, if we could have the lights turned down within the...
All right.
Would one of you be so kind as to turn that projector on beside you right there? We've moved the screen. If you can just focus that for me as well, that little knob right there. Thank you. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. The purpose of this presentation is to acquaint you with the type of material that is in question. I will be covering the themes of violence and sexuality. Bear in mind that what you are about to see and hear is a small sample of the abundant material available today. Today, the element of violence, brutal erotica, has exploded in rock music in an unprecedented way. Many albums today include songs that encourage suicide, violent revenge, sexual violence, and violence just for violence sake. This is Steve Boucher. Steve is dead. While listening to AC/DC Shoot to Thrill, Steve fired his father's gun into his mouth. A few days ago, I was speaking in San Antonio. The day before I arrived, they buried a young high school student. This young man had taken his tape deck to the football field. He hung himself while listening to AC/DC's Shoot to Thrill. Suicides become epidemic in our country among teenagers. Some 6,000 will take their lives this year. Many of these young people will find encouragement from some rock stars who present death as a positive, almost attractive alternative. The album I'm holding up in front of you is by the band Metallica. It's on Elektra Asylum Records. A song on this album is called Fade to Black and says the following: I have lost the will to live. Simply nothing more to give. There is nothing more for me. I need the end to set me free. Death greets me warm. I will just say goodbye. Consider the self-destructive violence that's encouraged in their song Whiplash. Bang your head against the stage like you never have before. Make it ring, make it bleed, make it really sore. In a frenzied madness, now is the time to let it rip, to let it fucking loose. We are gathered here to maim and kill, for this is what we choose. Ozzy Osbourne, on his first solo album shown here, sings a song called Suicide Solution. Ozzy insists that he in no way encourages suicidal behavior in young people, and yet he appears in photographs such as these. Got ahead of ourselves there. I'm sorry, here we go. In photographs such as these in periodicals that are geared toward the young teenage audience. For those of you that can't make that out because of the lights, it's a picture of Ozzy with a gun barrel stuck into his mouth. This is the cover of Twisted Sister's high-selling LP for Atlantic Records called Stay Hungry. An example of Twisted Sister's appeal to young people is evident in the back-to-school contest being run by MTV. First prize is a get-together with Twisted Sister. Is that, do me a favor, I think we want an automatic there. If you'll, that little knob at the bottom, if you'll run that back, toward the back. No, I'm sorry, back toward the back of the projector. There's a turn-on knob and the knob below that. Run that back. Okay. No, the one below that. Run that back to the back. There you go. I think we got on automatic. My apologies. The back-to-school contest being run by MTV's first prize is a meeting with Twisted Sister. The hit song from the album, We're Not Gonna Take It, was released as a video, which you saw just a moment ago, a video in which the band members proceed to beat up Daddy, who won't let them rock. Their first album, which has been re-released by Atlantic Records, is called Under the Blade. The title song includes words like, your hands are tied, your legs are strapped, you're going under the blade. In lyrics from the song Shoot 'Em Down, the band sings, they think we're fools, want to make their own rules. It only gets us madder. They think they're hot, well, I say they're not. They shoot us down for fun. If they don't want to play, then let's make them pay. Shoot 'em down with a fucking gun. This is the cover of AC/DC's brand new album for Atlantic Records, Fly on the Wall. One of the songs from the album, Back in Business, was released as a single for airplay. It included the words, don't you struggle or try to bite. You want some trouble? I'm the king of vice. I'm a wrecking ball. I'm a stinging knife. Steal your money. Gonna take your life. Of course, AC/DC is no stranger to violent material. Their song Squealer contained the following. She said she'd never been bald before, and I don't think she'll bawl no more. Fixed her good. One of their fans I know you're aware of is the accused Night Stalker. Judas Priest sing of violent rape in their song Eat Me Alive from the Columbia record release, Defenders of the Faith. Squealing in passion as the rod of steel injects, gut-wrenching frenzy that deranges every joint. I'm gonna force you at gunpoint to eat me alive. The band Great White, on their album On Your Knees, sing these words, knocking down your door, gonna pull you to the floor, taking what I choose, never gonna lose, gonna drive my love inside you, gonna nail your ass to the floor. This is Motley Crue. Their albums for Electra Asylum sell millions, and they're one of the top 10 grossing concert bands this year. Their albums include songs like Bastard, quote, out goes the light, in goes my knife, pull out his life, consider that bastard dead. Livewire, quote, I'll either break her face or take down her legs, get my ways at will, go for the throat, never let loose, going in for the kill. And Too Young to Fall in Love, not a woman, but a whore. I can taste the hate, well now I'm killing you, watch your face turning blue. This is the cover of a new album by the band Avatar. The title song is about a homicidal maniac, and notice on the cover the arms of the man wrapped around the woman. In one hand is a long knife, the other hand holds a hook being pressed against the woman's breast. This is the cover of an album entitled Rise of the Mutants by the band Impaler. Notice the man with the bloody meat in his mouth and hand is kneeling over the bloody arm of a woman. The back cover shows a woman with a bloody face at the feet of the drummer. While both of these albums were released on independent labels as opposed to major labels, they are reviewed and featured in teen rock magazines and are available in local record stores. This band, Wasp, recently signed a $1.5 million contract with Capitol Records. This is their first release, the Capitol album entitled The Torture Never Stops. Violence permeates the album as well as their stage show, which has included chopping up and throwing raw meat into the audience, drinking blood from a skull, and until recently, the simulated rape and murder of a half-nude woman. This single is available in record stores across the country. The cover features the crotch piece that lead singer Blackie Lawless wears on stage. In this picture, there is blood dripping down his stomach, hands, and off of the blade between his legs. The song that accompanies this photo is Animal, Fuck Like a Beast. This band, Pile Driver, fuses together the elements of sexual violence and occult in the song Lust. Get a little ahead of ourselves here. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got it. It's right here in front of me. The song is called Lust. The lyrics say, hell on fire, lust's desire. The devil wants to stick you, the devil wants to lick you. He wants your body, he wants your spirit. Naked, twisting bodies, sweating. Prince of darkness, prince of evil, spread your legs and scream. This is no dream. Degradation, humiliation, thrusting, shoving, animals humping. He's like a dog in heat. You're just another piece of meat. Craving demons fill you with pain. Now you're bloodied and stained, hurt and beaten. He will possess you. He will molest you. Sex with Satan. Sex with Satan. While we will not consider the subject in depth at this time, it should be noted that occultic themes, primarily Satanism, is prevalent among such bands as Slayer, Venom, and Merciful Fate, one of whose albums is shown in this picture. Let's move on to sexuality, a theme which has been part of rock music since its beginning. Today's rock artists are describing sexual activity and practice in terms more graphic than ever before. Many of you are aware of Purple Rain, the multi-million seller by Prince. Much has been said about the song Darling Nikki from the album. I met a girl named Nikki. I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. I met her in a hotel lobby masturbating with magazines. Another album by Prince called Dirty Mind presents a positive attitude toward the subject of incest. These lyrics are from the song called Sister. I was only 16, but I guess that's no excuse. My sister was 32 and kind of alone. My sister never made love to anyone but me. Incest is everything it's said to be. This is the cover of the album Stack Attack by the band Wrathchild. The back cover of this album, which is available to young children in record stores, included this photo of a nude woman on the back of the album. Songs include Sweet Surrender, quote, I lick my lips and make advances, you lay on down and let me in. But you can't fight, you've got no choice, I'll take you down and rub my cream in. Another song on an earlier album called Cock Rock Shock said the words, we're gonna fuck you and oh you fucking little bitch. This is Motley Crue's album, Shout at the Devil, double platinum. The song on the album we're concerned with here is 10 Seconds to Love. Touch my gun, but don't pull my trigger. Shine my pistol some more. Here I come. Reach down real low, slide it in real slow. You feel so good. Do you want some more? I've got one more shot. My gun is still warm. The band Kiss, popular with young people at all times. Their brand new album was released just yesterday. Includes songs such as Fits Like a Glove, Ain't a Cardinal Sin, Baby, Let Me In, Girl, I'm Gonna Treat You Right, Well, goodness sakes, my snake's alive and it's ready to bite. Baby, let me in, it fits like a glove, I think I'm gonna burst. When I go through her, it's like a hot knife through butter. And the song, Give Me More, Hot Blood, Need Your Love, Hard as Rock, Can't Get Enough. Want to feel you deep inside, pumping through my veins, fill you to the core, like a dog to the bone, make you sweat, make you moan, come on, lick my candy cane. We mentioned Morris Day already. This is Betsy. She's the lead singer of a band called Bitch. The album is called Be My Slave and is available in record stores. One of the songs is called Give Me a Kiss. The way you grab me makes my knees shake. The way you pull my arms makes my body quake. The way you yank my hair, it just makes me want to kill you. I'll take off my clothes, kick me in the shins, come on and slap me in the face, and I'll get down on my knees and move you like this. And the song Leatherbound. The whip is my toy, handcuffs are your joy. You hold me down and I'm screaming for more. When you tie me up and gag me the way you give me pain, come on, give me lashes. The Rolling Stone on their album Undercover also sang of sadomasochistic activity in the song Tie You Up, The Pain of Love. You dream of it, passionate, you even get a rise from it. Feel the hot cum dripping on your thigh from it. Why so divine, the pain of love? Even the Jacksons, mainstream pop music today, their song Torture was released as a video and was shown on national TV. That video included pictures of women dressed in leather bondage masks with whips in their hands, in chains and wrapped up in handcuffs. Some artists take their pornographic rock to the stage. This is a picture of Wendy O. Williams in concert, concerts that young adolescents can attend. How bad can it get? The list is endless. This album was released just recently by a band called The Mentors. It was released on the album the label Enigma Records, which also launched Motley Crue's career. The album includes songs like 4F Club, Finder, Feeler, Fucker, and Forgetter, Free Fix for a Fuck, Clap Queen, My Erection is Over, and the song Golden Showers, which says these words, listen, you little slut, do as you are told, come with daddy for me to pour the gold. Golden showers, all through my excrements you shall roam. Bend up and smell my anal vapor. Your face is my toilet paper. On your face I leave a shit tower. Golden showers. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks, and I thank you.
I'm sorry your time has expired. If we could have the lights on, please. If you, Mr. Ling, you might want to stay at the table if there's a chair there. Mrs. Gore, let me begin by asking you. You have children, I understand.
Yes, I do. 4 children, 12, 8, 6, and 2.
Well, the 12-year-old, does the 12-year-old buy records?
Yes, she does, and she's been buying them since she was 7, 8. Not a lot, but occasionally.
Do you have any way of knowing what's on the records that she buys?
No, I don't have any way of knowing that now.
There is nothing on the face of the album which would notify you if the record has pornographic material or material glorifying violence?
No, there is nothing that would suggest that to me at this time.
It would be unrealistic, wouldn't it, for a parent to go into the record store and play the record in its entirety to find out what the words are?
Well, it is. Normally, you're not allowed to open a record and play it until after you've purchased it.
Now, Mr. Ling, you pointed out at the beginning of your presentation that you knew of a couple of cases where kids had committed suicide while listening to rock music that advocates suicide. Do you believe that those are rare cases of rock music influencing behavior, or do you think that that it's more commonplace? Do you think that, in other words, do you think that this music is tasteless, but that it really doesn't have very much effect, or do you think that the music has some negative consequences?
I think it has great effect. As one who's worked with teenagers and college students on a professional level for the last 10 years, I've watched the things that they've watched, listened to what they've listened to. I've seen their behavior influenced and encouraged by this music. More importantly, sir, the problem is that the music might reflect the behavior, attitudes, values of those in the 18 or older bracket. However, when that music is listened to by 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and 10-year-olds, it moves from the area of being a reinforcer and an encourager into the role of educator. And many of these young children are being educated in these things before they have any kind of frame of reference to properly put it in.
Senator Gore?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, a statement was submitted for the record from Dr. Thomas Radecki, which bears upon the question you just asked about whether or not behavior is influenced. And if it is appropriate, I'd like that to be included in the record.
Without objection.
I would just like to reinforce a couple of statements that were made in the prepared testimony. I believe, Ms. Baker, you began by saying that what you're proposing and what the group is proposing does not involve any request for government action. Is that correct?
That's right.
And the last time I was with my wife in a group of people where tough questions were asked, the answer was "I do." So I'm a little reluctant to ask some tough questions here. But when you responded to the chairman a minute ago, you said there's no way you can tell. In fact, some of the material has an album cover design which will indicate it, but some does not. Is that correct?
That's right. Some of the album covers are very explicit. In fact, they look like they should be in Playboy or Penthouse, some of them. And they're in the record bins available to young children. But others, you can't tell. I bought the Purple Rain album for our 11-year-old, and I didn't know that Darling Nikki was on it, and I felt that it was inappropriate for her and her 8- and 6-year-old sister to hear a song describing a girl masturbating in a hotel lobby with a magazine. I had no warning. In fact, all I knew was from that Prince was the new creative teen idol on the scene and had just received a Grammy Award. So I would have appreciated it if I had known that before purchase.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rockefeller?
It doesn't make any difference to me who answers this question, but there's a difference. For example, I thought that the presentation that your particular panel made was much more to the point than the previous presentation, because it was not only graphic, shocking, but there wasn't any question as to where was there a line. Now, at some point in all of this, there's a question, I suppose, as to where the line is. If something is graphic, does that cross the line? Does it have to be explicit? Where in your discussions with record companies, and 80% I understand that the output with respect to companies have agreed to conform to the labeling principle. Where should the line be drawn as to what is in the area of fantasy, which is disturbing to a parent, and yet is not in some ways as dangerous, but then on the other hand, something which is graphic and explicit and which is clearly dangerous and which clearly undermines the vulnerable, unformed values of still unformed minds. One can't stop everything. The companies, you're saying, are going to have to make the judgment. In your conversations with them, how do they define the line that should not be crossed?
In our conversations with Mr. Gortikov, he's made it clear that this is a difficult area. We suggested that the industry appoint an industry-wide panel with some consumer representatives one time to discuss the set of criteria that would be used. It would not be a list of words. It would be simply a policy statement such as, we will be sensitive to lyrics that talk about graphic brutality toward women, violence, rape, explicit sexuality. We believe that the record companies and those individuals within those companies are best left to make those subjective decisions. There will always be areas of gray, but what we want from them is an affirmation that they will be sensitive to this concern as they individually apply a warning label within their individual companies. We need for them to be able to get together and say, we'll do this in good faith, we'll go back to our individual companies, we'll make those subjective decisions and judgments ourselves. That's what we are asking them to do.
Why is it, do you think, had they been planning on doing this before you all approached them? I mean, this business has been going on, MTV and all the rest of it, for some time now. I don't know how long you all have been in existence, but the problem is bad and apparently getting worse. It is the sort of the terror that exists on the part of the parent and the whole question of what is it that my child is learning and seeing, that is with us every day. Was this simply the result of your conversations with them that they suddenly agreed to decide to do some labeling?
Senator, over a year and a half ago, the National PTA passed a resolution and wrote to the music industry, the recording industry, asking them to label sexually explicit, violent, profane, or material that encouraged the use of drugs and alcohol. And that, as far as I know, got no response from the industry, but there have been calls for this sort of thing. Some, very few, but some albums have been labeled as objectionable to some people. So there has been a little bit of this done in the industry in the past, but it's been very small, and our hope is that there would be a uniform application across the board in the recording industry to give parents and consumers warning when explicit, blatant, violent material is in the album or any music product.
Those companies which are declining to go along with labeling, which I take to be about 20% of the volume, what are they giving as reasons for not going along?
We have not had direct conversations with them. We've been speaking with Stanley Gortikov, who's head of the Recording Industry Association of America, and he represents the majority of companies that produce the majority of records, and so I couldn't speak to that.
Is there any serious, I know there's serious doubt because I've read some of the testimony in other situations, but is there any serious doubt with serious people with whom you've talked that the relationship between violence and disturbing tendencies and occurrences among young people and the proliferation of this type of material that we've seen this morning, is there any serious doubt that there isn't a direct relationship between those two? Are there some who would argue that you're simply trying to suppress First Amendment rights and missing the point?
And some, make the point, and it's certainly true, that sex and violence pervade every level of our society today. So we would just say that music, which is a very important part of young people who are forming their characters and developing their value systems, learning how to relate to the opposite sex, even what they think about sex is not defined in their minds yet. We think that it does have an influence on these young minds, but we certainly do not blame music for all the ills that exist in the teenage population, the younger children.
But the escalation of the so-called MTV phenomenon and the things that we've seen this morning, and on your concern, the relationship between those two is incontrovertible in your mind, is it not?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gorton. Senator Exton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I've been around here a while, and I've been through many hearings and many committees, including Armed Services on the MX missile, the Strategic Defense Initiative, Commerce Committee on a whole wide range of deregulation, Budget Committee with regard to the national debt and what we're going to do about cutting down the expenditures of the federal government. But this is the largest media event, both in this room and the people waiting outside, that I have ever seen. I want to first congratulate you ladies for coming here and testifying of the concerns that you have. It seems to me that this should be voluntarily worked out without federal legislation, without regulations. Rock music doesn't appeal to me at all, but it does to my kids and it does to my grandchildren. Therefore, I agree generally with the thesis that's been brought forth here this morning that the arts, even though that term might be used loosely, the way I view it, one of the things that I find it most difficult to do is to impose upon others what my particular beliefs are, whether those beliefs be to my children or my grandchildren. I do happen to believe, though, that you were correct in what the thrust, I believe, of what we saw this morning, some of which was personally offensive to me and other things that were not. We all have our own individual goals, I guess, and how we view those. I guess a key question that I would like to ask you is, if there's one thing that's come through loud and clear, to me at least, is that you do not want federal legislation and you do not want federal regulation, at least at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We do not want legislation to remedy this problem. The problem is one that developed in the marketplace. The music industry has allowed the excesses that you saw, and we believe the music industry is the entity to address those excesses. We would like them to do this voluntarily. We propose no legislative solution whatsoever.
When you say legislation, do you also include the term that I use, regulation?
Yes.
Federal regulation?
Yes.
Well, given that, and given, I think, what I've tried to put forth as my feelings on this, Mr. Chairman, I suppose it's nice to have these hearings and discuss these things, because I think it is a concern. But I wonder, Mr. Chairman, if we're not talking about federal regulation and we're not talking about federal legislation, what is the reason for these hearings in front of the Commerce Committee? Can anyone answer that? I didn't schedule these hearings. I'm glad to be here to take part in them. But sometimes I wonder why these media events are scheduled and for what possible reason,
Well, I think
if we're not being asked to do anything about it.
Yeah. No, I think that the point is that there are problems that exist in the country that are not necessarily solved by legislation or by regulation. Fortunately, the be-all and end-all in the United States is not legislation that's enacted by Congress. I think the point of the hearings is to provide a forum for airing what a lot of people perceive as a real problem.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that may well be, and that may well be an intention of what the Congress should or should not do. But as one member of the Congress, I think that we indulge in too much publicity events that is far beyond the scope of regulation and legislation, which I think is our primary purpose.
All right, Senator Caston.
Chairman, thank you. I have no questions at this time.
Senator Hawkins.
Mrs. Baker, this is one senator that feels that there's no absolute right to free speech. It's been my experience that no one has the absolute right to yell fire in a theater which is not on fire. And I'd like that statement to be in the record. I believe no one has the right to poison our children with the lyrics that you have, with your group, showed this committee so graphically today, that does have an impact on our young children. And to get back to my original tenet, I would like to know, in your experiences as mothers, where did your children first hear of the record that they asked for the money to purchase? Did they hear that on MTV? Did they see the videotape preview on MTV? Or was it on a radio station?
Well, my 8-year-old hears music on her clock radio. I mean, she doesn't have tapes and records at this stage in her life, but she does listen to the radio.
And then from that, decide she would like the entire album.
Yes, that's right.
So the original exposure to this kind of, can't think of a good word for it, but pornography, rock, would be through the public airwaves, whether it be MTV or a radio station.
Well, Senator, I will say this, that basically most broadcasters are very responsible. There are a few fringe, hard rock stations that play things that are pornographic, but basically your main stations don't play the worst offenders. They will play a song on an album that will get into the top 40 and maybe have some violent or sexually explicit lyrics on the album. They will not play, generally, the song that is sexually explicit. Times are changing, though, because recently Shana Easton's Sugar Walls, which is really a fairly graphic song about female genital arousal, has been on the charts and it's played 10 to 12 times a day. That's one of our concerns, that this is becoming more and more mainstream, and that we feel this is a time to talk about it.
And if the labeling took place that you have requested, do you envision that prior to the disc jockey playing that on the radio that he would read the label?
Well, I'll tell you, all program directors know exactly what they're playing on their records. They don't need a label to know that. That's part of their business and that's part of their job, and they know exactly what they're playing on. So I would say that it's not going to be a help for the program directors and DJs. It's going to be a help for parents. We're the ones that need the information. Those in the business know.
And do you have certain stations that you do not allow your child to listen to in the home?
Well, it's not come to that at my house with just an 8-year-old. The big ones, that's another matter, but most of them are grown and they can make their own decisions about that. This is, for the young, she's not, the hard metal, heavy metal stations is not something. It's others that she likes to listen to.
Well, it's my understanding that it's no longer possible to have a successful rock album without a video. That MTV is widely viewed by children, whether their parents are at home or not. And has your group met with representatives of the TV industry?
Yes, we have. And MTV was originally begun to promote records. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it. And there have been some really fun things done with MTV and some really awful things done. So we have talked with them, but we will meet with them again.
What was their response?
Well, their response was that they already had standards in place. We thought that their standards should be a little tighter for a younger viewing audience. But we will be asking them to label videos that have violent or sexually explicit material in them so that parents will know, and also to consider clustering very safe is not a good word, but I mean harmless videos at a time when the young audience would be viewing. So that would be our suggestion to them.
And when are you meeting with them again?
Well, in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. I know that for all of you, it was not the most pleasant of experiences to read some of the lyrics in public, but it was very helpful, and appreciate your attendance. John Denver is on the witness list. He has had to leave the hearing room for another engagement. He plans to be back. So the next witness will be Mr. Frank Zappa. Mr. Zappa, thank you very much for being with us. Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Frank Zappa. This is my attorney, Larry Stein, from Los Angeles. Can you hear me?
If you could speak very directly and clearly into the microphone, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, my name is Frank Zappa. This is my attorney, Larry Stein. The statement that I prepared that I sent you 100 copies of is 5 pages long, so I have shortened it down, and I'm going to read a condensed version of it. Certain things have happened. I've been listening to the event in the other room, and I've heard some conflicting reports as to whether or not people in this committee want legislation. I understand that Mr. Hollings does from his comments. Is that correct?
I think you better concentrate on your testimony rather than asking questions of the committee, Mr. Zappa.
The reason I need to ask it because I have to change something in my testimony if there is not a clear-cut version of whether or not legislation is what is being discussed here. So,
do the best you can, because I don't think anybody here can characterize Senator Hollings' position.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on with the issue then. First thing
I might help out Jim out just a little bit if I might, but I can't be statement.
Yes.
This is one senator that might be interested in legislation and or regulation to some extent, recognizing the problems with free right of expression and my previously expressed views that I don't believe I should be telling other people what they have to listen to. But I really believe that the suggestions made by the original panel was some kind of an arrangement for voluntarily policing this in the music industry is the correct way to go. So if it'll help you out in your testimony, I might join Senator Hollings or others in some kind of legislation and or regulation unless the free enterprise system, both the producers and you as the performers, see fit to clean up your act.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's hardly voluntary. First thing I would like to do, because I know there is some foreign press involved here, and they might not understand what the issue is about. One of the things the issue is about is the First Amendment to the Constitution, and it's short, and I'd like to read it so they will understand. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. That's for reference. These are my personal observations and opinions. I speak on behalf of no group or professional organization. The PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years dealing with the interpretational and enforcemental problems inherent in the proposal's design. It is my understanding that, in law, First Amendment issues are decided with a preference for the least restrictive alternative. In this context, the PMRC demands are the equivalent of treating dandruff by decapitation. No one has forced Mrs. Baker or Mrs. Gore to bring Prince or Sheena Easton into their homes. Thanks to the Constitution, they are free to buy other forms of music for their children. Apparently, they insist on purchasing the works of contemporary recording artists in order to support a personal illusion of aerobic sophistication. Ladies, please be advised, the $8.98 purchase price does not entitle you to a kiss on the foot from the composer or performer in exchange for a spin on the family Victrola. Taken as a whole, the complete list of PMRC demands reads like an instruction manual for some sinister kind of toilet training program to housebreak all composers and performers because of the lyrics of a few. Ladies, how dare you? The ladies' shame must be shared by the bosses of the major labels who, through the RIAA, chose to bargain away the rights of composers, performers, and retailers in order to pass H.R. 2911, the blank tape tax, a private tax levied by an industry on consumers for the benefit of a select group within that industry. Is this a consumer issue? You bet it is. The major record labels need to have H.R. 2911 whiz through a few committees before anybody smells a rat. One of them is chaired by Senator Thurman. Is it a coincidence that Mrs. Thurman is affiliated with the PMRC? I can't say she's a member because the PMRC has no members. Their secretary told me on the phone last Friday that the PMRC has no members, only founders. I asked how many other DC wives are non-members of an organization that raises money by mail, has a tax-exempt status, and seems intent on running the Constitution of the United States through the family paper shredder. I asked her if it was a cult. Finally, she said she couldn't give me an answer and that she had to call their lawyer. While the wife of the Secretary of Treasury recites, "Gonna drive my love inside you," and Senator Gore's wife talks about bondage and oral sex at gunpoint on the CBS Evening News, people in high places work on a tax bill that is so ridiculous, the only way to sneak it through is to keep the public's mind on something else. Porn rock. Is the basic issue morality? Is it mental health? Is it an issue at all? The PMRC has created a lot of confusion with improper comparisons between song lyrics, videos, record packaging, radio broadcasting, and live performances. These are all different mediums, and the people who work in them have a right to conduct their business without trade-restraining legislation whipped up like an instant pudding by the wives of Big Brother. Is it proper that the husband of a PMRC non-member founder person sits on any committee considering business pertaining to the blank tape tax or his wife's lobbying organization? Can any committee thus constituted find facts in a fair and unbiased manner? This committee has three that we know about: Senator Danforth, Senator Packwood, and Senator Gore. For some reason, they seem to feel there is no conflict of interest involved. Children in the vulnerable age bracket have a natural love for music. If, as a parent, you believe they should be exposed to something more uplifting than sugar walls, support music appreciation programs in schools. Why haven't you considered your child's need for consumer information? Music appreciation costs very little compared to sports expenditures. Your children have a right to know that something besides pop music exists. It is unfortunate that the PMRC would rather dispense governmentally sanitized heavy metal music than something more uplifting. Is this an indication of PMRC's personal taste, or just another manifestation of the low priority this administration has placed on education for the arts in America? The answer, of course, is neither. You can't distract people from thinking about an unfair tax by talking about music appreciation. For that, you need sex, and lots of it. The establishment of a rating system, voluntary or otherwise, opens the door to an endless parade of moral quality control programs based on things certain Christians don't like. What if the next bunch of Washington wives demands a large yellow J on all material written or performed by Jews in order to save helpless children from exposure to concealed Zionist doctrine? Record ratings are frequently compared to film ratings. Apart from the quantitative difference, there is another that is more important. People who act in films are hired to pretend. No matter how the film is rated, it won't hurt them personally. Since many musicians write and perform their own material and stand by it as their art, whether you like it or not, an imposed rating will stigmatize them as individuals. How long before composers and performers are told to wear a festive little PMRC armband with their scarlet letter on it? Bad facts make bad law, and people who write bad laws are, in my opinion, more dangerous than songwriters who celebrate sexuality. Freedom of speech, freedom of religious thought, and the right to due process for composers, performers, and retailers are imperiled if the PMRC and the major labels consummate this nasty bargain. Are we expected to give up Article 1 so the big guys can collect an extra $1 on every blank tape and 10 to 25% on tape recorders? What's going on here? Do we get to vote on this tax? I think that this whole matter has gotten completely blown out of proportion, and I agree with Senator Exton that there is a very dubious reason for having this event. And I also agree with Senator Exton that you shouldn't be wasting time on stuff like this, because from the beginning I have sensed that it is somebody's hobby project. Now, I've done a number of interviews on television, and people keep saying, can't you take a few steps in their direction? Can't you sympathize? Can't you empathize? I do more than that at this point. I've got an idea for a way to stop all this stuff and a way to give parents what they really want, which is information, accurate information as to what is inside the album without providing a stigma for the musicians who have played on the album, or the people who sing it, or the people who wrote it. And I think that if you listen carefully to this idea, that it might just get by all of the constitutional problems and everything else as far as I'm concerned. I have no objection to having all of the lyrics placed on the album routinely all the time. But there is a little problem. Record companies do not own the right automatically to take these lyrics because they're owned by publishing companies. So just as all the rest of the PMRC proposals would cost money, this would cost money too, because the record companies would need, they shouldn't be forced to bear the cost of the extra expenditure to the publisher to print those lyrics. If you consider that the public needs to be warned about the contents of the records, what better way than to let them see exactly what the songs say? That way you don't have to put any kind of subjective rating on the record. You don't have to call it R, X, D, A, anything. You can read it for yourself. But in order for it to work properly, the lyrics should be on a uniform kind of a sheet. Maybe even the government could print those sheets. Maybe it should even be paid for by the government if the government is interested in making sure that people have consumer information in this regard. And you also have to realize that if a person buys the record and takes it out of the store, once it's out of the store, you can't return it if you read the lyrics at home and decide that little Johnny is not supposed to have it. I think that that should at least be considered, and the idea of imposing these ratings on live concerts, on the albums, asking record companies to reevaluate or drop or violate contracts that they already have with artists should be thrown out. That's it all. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zappa. You understand that the previous witnesses were not asking for legislation, and I don't know, I can't speak for Senator Hollings, but I think that the prevailing view here is that nobody's asking for legislation. The question is just focusing on what a lot of people perceive to be a problem, and you've indicated that you at least understand that there is another point of view.
Yeah, I do
and
understand.
that there are people who think that, you know, parents should have some knowledge of what goes into their home.
All along, my objection has been with the tactics used by these people in order to achieve the goal. I just think that the tactics have been really bad. And the whole premise of their proposal, they were badly advised in terms of record business law. They were badly advised in terms of practicality, or they would have known that certain things don't work mechanically with what they suggested.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I found your statement very interesting, and let me say, although I disagree with some of the statements that you make and have made on other occasions, I have been a fan of your music, believe it or not, and I respect you as a true original and a tremendously talented musician. Your suggestion on printing the lyrics on the album is a very interesting one, because the PMRC at one point said they would propose either a rating or warning, or printing all the lyrics on the album, and the record companies came back and said that they didn't want to do that. But I think an awful lot of people agree with your suggestion that one easy way to solve this problem for parents would be to put the actual words there so that parents could see them. In fact, the National Association of Broadcasters made exactly the same request of the record company. So I think your suggestion is an intriguing one and might really be a solution for the problem.
Well, you just have to understand that it does cost money, because you can't expect publishers to automatically give up that right, which is a money-earning right for them. Somebody's going to have to reimburse the publishers. The record industry is going to, without trying to mess up the album jacket art and impose that lyrics only be printed on the back, it should be a sheet of paper that is slipped inside the shrink wrap, that when you take it out, you can still have a complete album package. So there's going to be some extra cost for printing it, but as long as people realize that for this kind of consumer safety, you're going to spend some money, and as long as you can find a way to pay for it, I think that would be the best way to let people know.
Well, you know, I don't disagree with that at all, and the separate sheet would also solve the problem with the cassettes as well, because you don't have the space for words on the cassette packs, and
that would have to be a little accordion fold then.
Yeah, it was something like that, and or just fold it. But a very large percentage of the albums now sold are sold in cassette form. I've listened to you a number of times on this issue, and I guess the question that I really want to get from you is, or the statement that I want to get from you is on whether or not you feel that the concern is legitimate, because occasionally you feel very strongly about your position. I understand that. Very articulate and forceful. But occasionally you give the impression that you think parents are just silly to be concerned at all.
That's not an accurate impression of.
Okay, well, please clarify it then.
First of all, I think it is the parents' concern. It is not the government's concern.
Yeah, they agree with you on that.
Well, that doesn't come across in the way they have been speaking. The whole drift that I've gotten, based on the media blitz that has attended the PMRC and its rise to infamy, is that they have a special plan, and it has smelled like legislation up until now. There are too many things that look like hidden agendas involved with this, and I'm a parent. I've got 4 children. 2 of them are here. I want them to grow up in a country where they can think what they want to think, be what they want to be, and not what somebody's wife or somebody in government makes them be. I don't want to have that, and I don't think you do either.
Okay, but now you're back on the other issue, and let me just say briefly on that they say repeatedly no legislation, no regulation, no government action. Certainly sounded pretty clear to me, and as far as a hidden agenda, you know, I don't see one, hear one, or know of one.
Okay, let me tell you why I've drawn these conclusions. First of all, they may say we are not interested in legislation, but there are others who do, and because of their project, bad things have happened in this country, in the industry. I believe there is actually some liability. Look at this. You have a situation where even if you go for the lyric printed thing in the record, because of the tendency among Americans to be copycats. One guy commits a murder, you get a copycat murder. Now you got copycat censors. You've got a very bad situation in San Antonio, Texas right now, where they're trying to pass PMRC type individual ratings and attach them to live concerts, with the mayor down there trying to make a national reputation by putting San Antonio on the map as the first city in the United States to have these regulations, against the suggestion of the city attorney who says, I don't think this is constitutional, but you know, there's this fervor to get in and do even more. And the other thing, that if the PMRC starts off talking about lyrics, but when they take it over into other realms, when they start talking about the videos, in fact, you misspoke yourself at the beginning in your introduction when you were talking about the music does this, the music does that. There is a distinct difference between those notes and the chords and the bass line and the rhythm that supports the words and the lyrics. I don't know whether you really are talking about controlling the type of music that kids hear. So just specifically, we're talking about lyrics. It began with lyrics, but even looking at the PMRC fundraising letter in the last paragraph at the bottom of the page, it starts looking like it's branching into other areas when it says, we realize that this material has pervaded other aspects of society, and it's like, what, you're going to fix it all for me?
No, I think what I think they're acknowledging some of the statements by some of their critics who say, well, why single out the music industry? But if I could have just half a minute more, Mr. Chairman. Before we got back into that stuff, you were saying, yes, you do believe that there is a legitimate concern.
Yeah, but the legitimate concern is a matter of taste on for the individual parent and how much sexual information that parent wants to give their child at what age, at what time, in what quantity, okay? And I think that because there is a tendency in the United States to hide sex, which I think is an unhealthy thing to do, and many parents do not give their children good sexual education in spite of the fact that little books for kids are available, and other parents demand that sexual education be taken out of school, it makes the child vulnerable, because if you don't have something rational to compare it to, when you see or hear about something that is aberrated, you do not perceive it as an aberration, okay?
Okay, I've run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rockefeller. Senator Gorton.
Mr. Zappa, I am astounded at the courtesy and soft-voiced nature of the comments of my friend, the senator from Tennessee. I can only say that I found your statement to be boorish, incredibly and insensitively insulting to the people who were here previously, that you could manage to give the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States a bad name if I felt that you had the slightest understanding of it, which I do not. You don't have the slightest understanding of the difference between government action and private action. And you have certainly destroyed any case you might otherwise have had with this senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is this private action?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to say that I was surprised Senator Gore knew and liked your music. I must confess that I never heard any of your music to my knowledge.
I would be more than happy to recite my lyrics to you.
Can we forego that?
You probably never heard of the Mothers of Invention.
I have heard of Glenn Miller and Mitch Miller. Did you ever perform with them?
As a matter of fact, I took music lessons in grade school from Mitch Miller's brother.
That's the first sign of hope we've had in this nation. Let's try and get down to a fundamental question here that I'd like to ask you, Mr. Zappa. Do you believe that parents have the right and the obligation to mold the psychological development of their children?
Yeah, I think they have that right, and I also think they have that obligation.
Do you see any extreme difficulty in carrying out those obligations for a parent by material falling into the hands of their children over which they have little or no control?
Well, one of the things that has been brought up before is talking about very young children getting access to the material that they've been showing here today. And what I've said to that in the past is a teenager may go into a record store unescorted with $8.98 in his pocket, but very young children do not. If they go into a record store, the $8.98 is in mom's pocket or dad's pocket, and they can always say, Johnny, buy a book. They can say, Johnny, buy instrumental music. There's some nice classical music here for you. Why don't you listen to that? The parent can ask or guide the child in another direction, away from Sheena Easton, Prince, or whoever else you've been complaining about. There's always that possibility.
As I understand it from your testimony, and once again I want to emphasize that I see nothing wrong whatsoever. In fact, I salute the ladies for bringing this to the attention of the public as best they see fit, and I I think you could tell from my testimony that I tend to agree with them, but I want to be very careful that we don't overstep our bounds and try and I emphasize once again telling somebody else what they should see. So I'm primarily worried about children. It seems to me from your statement that you have no obligation or no objection whatsoever to printing lyrics, if that would be legally possible, or from a standpoint of having the room to do that on records or tapes. Isn't that what you said?
I think it would be advisable for two reasons. One, it gives people one of the things that they've been asking for. It gives them that type of consumer protection, because if you can read the English language and you can see the lyrics on the back, you have no excuse for complaint if you take the record out of the store. And also, I think that the record industry has been damaged, has been given a very bad rap by this whole situation, because it's been indicated, or people have attempted to indicate, that there is so much of this kind of material that people object to in the industry, that that's what the industry is. It is not that at all. Some of the albums that have been selected for abuse here are obscure. Some of them are already several years old. And I think that a lot of deep digging was done in order to come up with the song about the anal vapors, or whatever it was that they were talking about before.
So if I understand you would be in support of printing the lyrics, but you are adamantly opposed to any kind of a rating system. Is that correct?
I'm opposed to the rating system because, as I said, if you put a rating on the record, it goes directly to the character of the person who made the record. Whereas if you rate a film, a guy who is in the film has been hired as an actor, he's pretending, you rate the film, whatever it is, it doesn't hurt him. But whether you like what's on the record or not, the guy who made it, that's his art. And to stigmatize him is not fair.
Well, likewise, if you're primarily concerned about the artists, is it not true that for many, many years we have had ratings of movies with indications as to the sexual content of movies, and that has been, as near as I can tell, a voluntary action on the part of the actors in the movies and the producers of the movie and the distributors? That seems to have worked reasonably well. What is wrong with that?
Well, first of all, it replaced something that was far more restrictive, which was the Hayes office. And as far as that being voluntary, there are people who wish they did not have to rate their film. They still object to rating their films, but the reason the ratings go on is because if they're not rated, they won't get distributed or showed in theaters. So there is a little bit of pressure involved there. And, but still, there is no stigma on the person.
The government does not require that. That's what the point I'm trying to make is. Yeah. And while I think these hearings should not have been held if we're not considering legislation or regulations at this time, I emphasized earlier that they might follow. I simply want to say to you that I suspect that unless the industry, quote, cleans up their act, and I use that, end quote, word again, there's likely to be legislation, and it seems to me that it would not be too far removed from reality or too offensive to anyone if you could follow the general guidelines, right, wrong, or indifferent, that are now in place with regard to the movie industry.
Well, I would object to that. I think that, first of all, I believe it was you who asked the question of Mrs. Gore, whether there was any other indication on the album as to the contents. And I would say that a buzzsaw blade between a guy's legs on the album cover is a good indication that it's not for little Johnny.
I don't believe I answered that question, but the point that you've made is a good one, because if that should not go to little minds, I think there should be at least some minimal activity or attempt on the part of the producers and the distributors, and indeed possibly the performers, to see that that does not get to that little mind. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Hollings.
Mr. Zappa, I apologize for coming back in late, but I'm just hearing the latter part of it. I hear that you say that perhaps we could print the words, and I think that's a good suggestion. But it is unfair to have it rated. Now, it's not considered unfair in the movie industry, and I want you to elaborate. I don't want to belabor you, but why is it unfair? I mean, it's accurate, isn't it? I mean...
Well, I don't know whether it is accurate, because they sometimes have trouble deciding how a film gets to be an X or an R or whatever, and you have two problems. One is the quantity of material, 325 films per year versus 25,000 four-minute songs per year, okay? You also have the problem that an album is a compilation of different types of cuts. If one song on the album is sexually explicit and all the rest of it sounds like Pat Boone, what do you get on the album? How are you going to rate it? You know, there are little technical difficulties here. And also you have the problem of having somebody in the position of deciding what's good, what's bad, what's talking about the devil, what's too violent, and, you know, and the rest of that stuff. But the point that I've made before is that when you rate the album, you're rating the individual because he takes personal responsibility for the music, and in the movies, the actors who are performing in the movie, it doesn't hurt them.
Well, very good. I think the actual printing of the content itself is perhaps even better than reading. Let everyone else decide for themselves.
I think you should leave it up to the parent, because not all parents want to keep their children totally ignorant.
Well, yeah, you and I would differ on what's ignorance and educated. I can see that, but
no, I happen to think that you're very educated.
I can't complain if it's there and they see what they're buying, and I think that would be a step in the right direction. But Senator Exton has pointed out whereby the primary movers here in this particular regard are not looking for legislation or regulations, that's our function. And to be perfectly candid with you, I would look for regulations, some kind of legislation, if it could be constitutionally accomplished, unless, of course, we have these initiatives from the industry itself. And I think your suggestion is a good one, that they print those words. That would go a long way to satisfying everyone's objections, I think.
All we have to do is find out how it's going to be paid for.
Good enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawkins.
Yeah. Yes. Say you have 4 children?
Yes.
Pardon me?
4 children.
4 children. Have you ever purchased toys for those children?
No, my wife does.
Well, I might tell you that if you were to go in a toy store, which is very educational for fathers, by the way, it's not a maternal responsibility to buy toys for children, that you may look on the box, and the box says this is suitable for 5 to 7 years of age, or 8 to 15, or 15 and above, to give you some guidance for a toy for a child. Do you object to that?
In a way, I do, because that means that somebody in an office someplace is making a decision about how smart my child is.
I'd be interested to see what toys your kids ever had.
Why would you be interested?
Just as a point of interest in this.
Well, come on over to the house and I'll show them to you. Really?
I might do that. Have you ever do you make a profit from sales of rock records?
Yes.
So you do make a profit from
Yes.
sales of rock records?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think that statement tells the story to this committee. Thank you.
Mr. Zappa, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next witness is John Denver.
We haven't gotten much on this one. Hey, you got bail by the tail here, huh? See? We've had SDI hearings and marked up the ECW bill. Since 11:30, and you just get the third witness. No, you can just let it out.
John, thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning, Mr.
proceed.
Chairman. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I apologize for running in and out. I seem to be testifying and briefing many people here in Capitol Hill today, and it causes the ingoing and outgoing. Honorable Chairman, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor and a privilege to appear before you this morning and to take advantage of the opportunity given me in our free society to speak my mind, to give voice to my opinions in a public forum in front of not only the leadership of our great country, but the press and the media, and through them all who might be listening around our country and around the world. I'm here to address the issue of a possible rating system in the recording industry, labeling records where excesses of explicit sex or graphic violence have occurred, And furthermore, references to drugs and alcohol or the occult are included in the lyrics. These hearings have been called to determine whether or not the government should intervene to enforce this practice. Mr. Chairman, this would approach censorship. May I be very clear that I am strongly opposed to censorship of any kind in our society or anywhere else in the world. I've had in my experience 2 encounters with a sort of censorship. My song Rocky Mountain High was banned from many radio stations as a drug-related song. This was obviously done by people who had never seen or been to the Rocky Mountains and also had never experienced the elation, the celebration of life, or the joy in living that one feels when he observes something as wondrous as the Perseid meteor shower. On a moonless and cloudless night, when there are so many stars that you have a shadow from the starlight. And you're out camping with your friends, your best friends, and introducing them to one of nature's most spectacular light shows for the very first time. Obviously a clear case of misinterpretation. And Mr. Chairman, what assurance have I that any national panel to review my music would make any better judgment? To my knowledge, my movie, Oh God, was not banned in any theaters. However, some newspapers refused to print our advertisements and some theaters refused to put the name of the film in the marquee. I don't believe that we were using the name of our Lord in vain. Quite the opposite, we were making a small effort to spread his message that we are here for each other and not against each other. Discipline and self-restraint, when practiced by an individual, a family, or a company, is an effective way to deal with this issue. The same thing when forced on a people by their government, or worse, by a self-appointed watchdog of public morals, is suppression and will not be tolerated in a democratic society. Mr. Chairman, the suppression of a people or of a society begins, in my mind, with the censorship of the written or spoken word. It was so in Nazi Germany. It is so in many places today where those in power are afraid of the consequences of an informed and educated people. In a mature and incredibly diverse society such as ours, the access to all perspectives of an issue becomes more and more important. Those things which in our experience are undesirable generally prove to be unfurthering and sooner or later become boring. That process cannot and should not be stifled. On the other hand, that which is denied becomes that which is most interesting. That which is hidden, that which is denied becomes that which is most desired, and that which is hidden becomes that which is most interesting. Consequently, a great deal of time and energy is spent trying to get at what is being kept from you. Our children, our people, our society, and the world cannot afford this waste. It was my pleasure to meet with radio programmers and broadcasters from all over the country this past week in Dallas. They expressed their concern about this issue and the direction in which it seemed to be going. They also expressed their willingness to practice the discipline and self-restraint that I mentioned earlier, especially when they were given direction by their listeners. Now, I believe this to be true because they're in business to please their listening audience. I would like to acknowledge the PMRC for bringing this issue to the attention of not only our industry, but our government and our people. It is obvious that we are dealing with a real problem which warrants our concern. I would like to point out, however, that we address ourselves not to the problem, but to the symptoms. I suggest that explicit lyrics and graphic videos are not so far removed from what is seen on television every day and night, whether it be in the soap operas or on the news. That we should point our finger at the recording industry while watching the general public at a nationally televised baseball game chant in unison, "The Blue Jays suck," is ludicrous. The problem, Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, has to do with our willingness as parents to take responsibility for the upbringing of our children, to pay attention to their interest, to respond to their needs, and to recognize that we as parents and as individuals have a greater influence on our children and on each other than anything else could possibly have. To quote a wise old man from ancient China, if there be righteousness, not self-righteousness, that's not part of the quote. If there be righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character. If there be beauty in the character, there will be harmony in the home. If there be harmony in the home, there will be order in the nation. And if there be order in the nation, there will be peace in the world. I thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, if I may, add a couple of personal words. I'm a father of 2 children, both adopted. I have a lot of friends in the music business, other rock performers who have children also. And all of them, including myself, we have a great concern for our children. That's why I'm here today. In my experience, sir, all over the world, one of the most interesting things about the music that young people are listening to is it gives us, as adults, a very clear insight as to what is going on in their minds. We can know what they're thinking by listening to the music that they surround themselves with. The people that I've had the opportunity to talk with, the troubled children, the teenagers who are considering suicide, what they express to me is a real frustration in their lives, an inability to communicate with their parents, an inability to understand or to envision any kind of a possible future because of the nuclear threat that we live under. They don't see things getting better economically. They don't see things getting better for the small businessman, for the small farmer. They do not see a future for themselves. It is my opinion that it is out of this that some young people put a gun into their mouths and pull the trigger. We can turn this around, sir. We can address the reality of a problem and not deal with just the symptoms and create not only a better world for our children, but for ourselves and all of humanity. We can end hunger. We can rid the world of nuclear weapons. We can learn to live together as human beings on a planet that travels through the universe, living the example of peace and harmony among all people.
John, thank you very much for your excellent statement. You talked about the importance of, like in your words, an informed and educated people, and about the importance of communication between parents and their children. And as I understand it, that is exactly the point that was made by the Parents Music Resource Center group that was here earlier. That is, they're not asking for censorship, they're not asking for government action. Nobody's proposed that. To my knowledge, there's no legislation that's pending that in any way suggests any censorship. The point is not less information. Nobody is trying to prevent rock stars from singing whatever they want, or music companies from publishing whatever they want. The question is one of communication and openness. Senator Exton said earlier, if we're not legislating, why have a hearing? Frequently we have oversight hearings in the Congress, and one of the reasons for it is to just air what's going on, to bring it all out in the open, to increase information, not to reduce information. What the mothers are saying is that they don't have sufficient information. They want to know more. They want to be more informed. They don't want less information. They don't want censorship. They want more information. They want to know. They don't want what goes on in their home simply to be a matter between the music artist, the rock star, and their 11 or 12-year-old, 13-year-old child. They want to be in on the act too, and all they want is more information as to what's going on. And it would seem to me that that is a reasonable request for them to make, that it is reasonable for all of us to be in on the act rather than just to have almost a private relationship between our kids and somebody outside the home.
I understand, Senator, and I applaud what is taking place here today. My concern is that it's sort of, it feels like if we're bringing this issue to the Congress, to the Senate, that there's a very real possibility that legislation is going to be acted upon. I understand that it hasn't. I understand. Yeah. But several gentlemen have said that if it looks like there's possible to make legislation, some of you today have said if it's possible to make legislation, that you would go further with this if there's a constitutional way to do that.
Just believe me, zero chance of legislation. I don't think anybody has introduced a bill, and I don't really think that's the possibility at all. I think the only question is there a possibility of, one, bringing the issue before the country?
And you have done that,
so
and I
that we
applaud
can
that.
just talk about it and ventilate our concerns. Secondly, is there a possibility of increasing the information that is available to parents of kids who have the real responsibility for raising those children and for establishing whatever values those children are going to have?
I understand.
Senator Hollings.
Yeah, welcome. I'm glad to see you working in addition to the hunger field, the hunger of the body, the hunger of the mind, John, and I'm delighted to work with you on this. There's some differences. For one thing is an old trial lawyer. We know well that Clarence Darrow made a 9-hour summation in the Scopes trial. If a trial lawyer today competing with television and television performers makes more than a 9-minute summation, he's lost the jury, his case, and everything else. The parent is in competition with that 6 hours of rock coming over radio and TV. Now, it's pleasant to talk about parents and their duties and responsibilities, but they're in one heck of a competition out there. And we do know that perhaps television, in many, many instances, parents trying to do their best, the Hinckley case and what have you, tried and tried but didn't realize. You say that the parents have a greater influence. Not necessarily so. An additional point that we have to take in mind is the proposition of the limited use of protected speech in the broadcast media. And you have mentioned just coming back from the radio and TV broadcasters. Unless we tend toward some rule or regulation, will that discipline develop? It hadn't. There is no discipline. Only since the movement now, the recent group, have we gotten any kind of offer or recognition of the problem itself. We know, talking about free speech, that the broadcast airways belong to the people. We'll take a radio station in my own backyard using four-letter words. The FCC fined them. That wasn't unconstitutional. We do have some authorities. We do have some responsibilities here. And they're not all clean-cut John Denvers. On the contrary, I haven't listened to too much of it, but it seems like the majority is otherwise. I think that the oral atmosphere developing in this particular hearing, that the committee's on trial and make darn sure we don't do nothing, ought to transmit rather back to the original problem. Filth, pornography, suicide, all this other stuff coming out of these records. Now, the other gentleman, Zappa, says, print the words. I rather like that, since I wouldn't have to read it. He would read it one way, obviously, and I would read it differently. And there is that human error involved. Do you have any recommendation for the committee other than just do nothing? I mean, you've talked in beautiful terms. You're the best I've seen on peace and the family. I'm not speaking facetiously, and the family and the responsibility and the wonderful human nature, and I'm with you on the stars. We're both supporters of Cousteau, and I've authored in this particular committee the oceanography programs. Barring all of that, are you saying do nothing?
No, sir, I'm not saying do nothing, and that is exactly why I'm here and why I applaud this hearing and applaud what these ladies, what the PMRC has presented to us.
Well, I think we've got to be sensible about it, but there is, like you say, particularly with at least the radio and TV, I can't read the words coming there. I can see that difference between Mr. Zappa and myself. If persons of free volition can go in and read the language and see the words there, I wouldn't have to read it. But then, to not have some inhibition, some kind of discipline, as you describe it, within the broadcast media, then we've flunked the course, because there are 6 hours of that thing steaming and beaming into the homes.
Well, you know, Senator, excuse me if I'm interrupting.
No, sir, not. I'm trying to...
When I was raised, television was just coming out, and golly, it was an attractive medium, and I could sit there in front of that TV set and watch it all day. My parents had some restrictions on how much time I could watch television during the week, especially when I was going to school, and I could choose the programs that I wanted to watch. And I think that this is kind of an influence that we can exercise as parents on our children. Just because it's on 7 hours doesn't mean our kids are going to get to sit there and watch it that whole time. And we can give them a certain amount of time. And over here for me, you know, one of the things that I'm fortunate with is my children and I live in a beautiful country, and we have a lot of activities which really call us outdoors, call us together and away from the boob tube. No, I don't watch very much television. And I think that we can exercise this kind of influence on our children, even in a city environment.
You and I are different. I mean, you and I are the same. I don't watch that much television, obviously, but the record is otherwise. They're watching television as much as instruction in the classroom in the public schools and more. All surveys show that, so it's being watched. So that's the fact. And living in the real world, where you and I would like to restrict our children, and me, my grandchildren now, it's a real problem. It's a real problem, and I guess you know from being a master at the art, the way you start off selling that record is to get it accepted at some good programming, some good broadcasting, and then the sales follow. And you can't print those words ahead of time, so I'll know to cut the television off quick or whatever it is, unless that discipline develops, in other words, with the broadcast media. We are going to be forced somewhere with regulations through the FCC or otherwise. I don't think the American public is going to go along just with a nice hearing up in Washington today. I think there's going to have to be something more developed of some kind of discipline, as you indicate, and I'm trying to find out from you, how do you develop that discipline a little bit better than what has been developed?
Well, I think that you know, a good beginning to addressing this real problem is this hearing that is taking place. What most concerns me, aside from potential legislation which might be enacted, which we have said which we've heard today is not going to be the case, is that the whole presentation made by the PMRC comes from, in my experience, a foundation of fear. The only thing we have to fear, as President Roosevelt said, is fear itself. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of what my children might see. I'm not afraid of anything that might be shown them or done in their presence that would lessen my influence on them or their opportunity to grow up and be fine, upstanding adults and perhaps someday serve in this very august body.
Well, most respectfully, President Roosevelt never heard these records.
Senator Gore.
I think the things that he heard were far worse, sir.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be able to ask some questions. I've been a fan for a long time, Mr. Denver, and not only of your music, but also of your contributions to efforts like Farm Aid at the present time, and also World Peace and your trips to the Soviet Union and elsewhere. Do you see the kind of trend in some rock music that is outlined by this presentation? Have you ever been to a Motley Crue concert, for example?
No, sir.
Do you agree that there does seem to be a growing trend in the, at least in the heavy metal area, that emphasizes explicit violence and sex and sadomasochism and the rest? You're aware of that music, aren't you?
Yes.
Why do you think that has been growing in popularity?
Again, sir, my experience, not only in this country but all over the world, is that music today is the medium which most specifically tells us what's going on in young people's minds. Not what's being put into them, but what reflects what they're interested in. I think that this addresses itself to a much graver problem, in fact, the source of the symptom that we're discussing here today.
Well, I mean, if a 10-year-old listens to a song glorifying rape, that's not reflecting what is in that 10-year-old's mind, is it?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that there are many 10-year-olds who know what rape is. Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that. If you have an explicit description of a suicide, for example, and a song that seems to glorify and promote suicide, that's not. I mean, young people are aware of that. Mr. Gore, Senator, excuse me for interrupting.
Sure.
If I could count the number of times that a mother or father has come up to me, or a child has come up to me and says, if I don't get your autograph, my mother's going to kill me. If I don't get your autograph, my daughter is going to kill me.
Yeah.
You know,
well, you see a
this is a
difference,
part
don't
of our language, and
Yeah.
and there might be a slight difference, but I don't think it's as big as you point out. You
Well,
know, the
if,
way this video that we watched here today, I think is probably a fantasy that every kid has about his father at some point in time. It may not be exactly those particular graphics. It may be out in the farm, being able to take your dad out and put a board to his fanny. But this goes on. This is a part of growing up, and our society has gotten increasingly complex. There are many more images to reach from. They all have an impact on a child's mind, and I'm saying that the small percentage of records that we're discussing here today, compared to the 125,000 songs that are released every year, is minuscule and is not going to affect our children to a degree that we need be fearful of. We need to be conscious of it, we must concern ourselves, and we need to communicate with our children and have them feel comfortable with communicating with us.
Well, let me come back to the question about suicide. Let's say you have a popular rock star who has a lot of fans, who sings a song that says suicide is the solution, and appears in fan magazines with a gun barrel pointed in his mouth, and promotes material that seems to glorify suicide. Here we have one of the highest rates of teen suicide of any country in the world. The rate has gone up 300% in the last decade among young people, while it's remained constant among adults. Do you think it's a responsible act for a record company to put out a song glorifying suicide, and for the artist to promote the album by putting a gun in his mouth in a suicidal, in a simulation of suicide?
I would not like to be the one to tell a record company or an artist what to do. I certainly think the picture that you describe is deplorable. And if I found that in my home, I would talk to my kids about it and get rid of it.
Could I just interrupt? It's my understanding that you have to leave. Is that?
We now leave this program for our regularly scheduled program update. We'll return to this program in just a few moments. Good morning. It's just before 1 a.m. here in the nation's capital, and you're watching C-SPAN, America's network. Join us beginning September 25th as we travel to Indianapolis, Indiana, as part of our States of the Nation tour. Here's a look at our schedule. At 3:25 a.m. Eastern, 12:25 a.m. Pacific, we'll show you a speech by Reverend Jesse Jackson. Following that, a program on security issues from a Pacific perspective at 4:05 a.m. Eastern. At 5:05 a.m. Eastern, 2:05 a.m. Pacific, the National Press Club hosts Speaker Geraldine Ferraro. Then at 6:05 a.m. Eastern, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee holds a hearing on Mideastern arms sales. Later today on C-SPAN, Robert Adams, Bureau Chief for the St. Louis Times-Dispatch, is our guest at 8:30 a.m. Eastern for our morning viewer call-in show. Following that, at 10 a.m. Eastern, we'll bring you live coverage of a House Energy and Commerce hearing on federal securities laws and spare parts overcharging. Then at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, the U.S. House of Representatives will reconvene. That's a look at our schedule. Thank you for watching C-SPAN. Up next, we'll return to the record lyric labeling hearing.
Appreciate that. Yes, I have an appointment with NASA at noon, and if it's possible, I would like to go to that, but I also really appreciate being able to discuss this with you all, and I'm happy to stay if I can handle that.
Let me ask if are there any more questions?
Mr. Chairman, I will stop my questions at this point and wish Mr. Denver good luck in getting on the space shuttle.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Senator Exton has a question, and I think Senator Pressler does.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being here.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your testimony. I don't know you, but although it may lead to the beginning of the end of your career, I like your music. In fact, I think I know you. I think a friend of yours, Rainbow Terrain, has talked about you. She's an art instructor and a friend of my wife's, and I kind of think I know her through you. Just one basic question. Please clarify for us, what is your opinion to the key question that's been asked time and time again here, and you've alluded to it. Are you for the printing of material on labels? Are you for or against, or are you for or against any kind of a rating as long as it's done voluntarily between the record companies and the producers? That's my key question, and I would simply say one more time, which I said every time I've had this microphone this morning. I think it's wrong to imply that although no bills have introduced, bills might not be introduced, and I want to hold that threat for what it's worth over the head of trying to accomplish some free enterprise volunteerism that most people have agreed to. What do you think about a free enterprise volunteerism getting together and either printing or coming up with a rating program of some kind that would be prominently displayed on records?
I'm opposed as an artist. I'm opposed to any kind of a rating system, voluntary or otherwise. Putting the lyrics on the sleeve of an album or on the jacket of an album is no problem for me. Again, I think it goes beyond reading the word, and I bring up again the song Rocky Mountain High. You know, some people, high is high, and high is getting stoned, and high is a feeling of elation, a celebration in life. As I told the people in the Soviet Union when I had the privilege of singing for them there, I sang Rocky Mountain High, and then I described what high meant to me, and then I said to them, that's how I feel having the privilege of singing for you. That is how I feel having the opportunity to participate in my government here today.
Thank you, Mr. Danforth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pressler.
I guess that ties in with my question. Your basic line is that you're against any type of government action in this area, or indeed any voluntary labeling.
I would be, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
John, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience for waiting so long.
Thank you, Senator. Great privilege to be with you all.
Thank you. Next we have Mr. Dee Snider, the Twisted Sister Free Fall Talent Group.
What? Not as the Twisted Sister.
Yep. That's the group.
Oh, this is one of the people who are... That's one of them.
Take the Saturday. Take this.
Mr. Snider, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon. I'll say both. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Dee Snider. That's S-N-I-D-E-R. I have been asked to come here to present my views on, quote, the subject of the content of certain sound recordings and suggestions that recording packages be labeled to provide a warning to prospective purchasers of sexually explicit or other potentially offensive content, unquote. Before I get into that, I'd like to tell the committee a little bit about myself. I'm 30 years old. I'm married. I have a 3-year-old son. I was born and raised a Christian, and I still adhere to those principles. Believe it or not, I do not drink, I do not smoke, and I do not do drugs. I do play in and write the songs for a rock and roll band named Twisted Sister that is classified as heavy metal. And I pride myself on writing songs that are consistent with my above-mentioned beliefs. There are many facets to this complex issue, and time does not permit me to address all of them. However, my feelings are expressed for the most part by the August 8, 1985 letter to the Parents Music Resource Center from Mr. Stanley Gortikov, President of the Recording Industry Association of America. This letter was a formal response to the PMRC's petition of the RIAA. The only part of this document I do not support is Mr. Gortikov's unnecessary and unfortunate decision to agree to a so-called generic label on some selected records. In my opinion, this should be retracted. Since I seem to be the only person addressing this committee today who has been a direct target of accusations from the presumably responsible PMRC, I would like to use this occasion to speak on a more personal note and show just how unfair the whole concept of lyrical interpretation and judgment can be, and how many times this can amount to little more than character assassination. I have taken the liberty of distributing to you material and lyrics pertaining to these accusations. There were 3 attacks in particular which I would like to address. Accusation number 1. This attack was contained in an article written by Tipper Gore, which was given the form of a full page in my hometown newspaper on Long Island. In this article, Ms. Gore claimed that one of my songs, Under the Blade, had lyrics encouraging sadomasochism, bondage, and rape. The lyrics she quoted have absolutely nothing to do with these topics. On the contrary, the words in question are about surgery and the fear that it instills in people. Furthermore, the reader of this article is led to believe that the 3 lines she quotes go together in the song, when, as you can see from reading the lyrics, the first 2 lines she cites are an edited phrase from the 2nd verse, and the 3rd line is a misquote of a line from the chorus. That the writer could misquote me is curious, since we make it a point to print all our lyrics on the inner sleeve of every album. As the creator of Under the Blade, I can say categorically that the only sadomasochism, bondage, and rape in this song is in the mind of Ms. Gore. Accusation number 2. The PMRC has made public a list of 15 of what they feel are some of the most blatant songs lyrically. On this list is our song, We're Not Gonna Take It, upon which has been bestowed a V rating indicating violent lyrical content. You'll note from the lyrics before you that there is absolutely no violence of any type either sung about or implied anywhere in the song. Now, it strikes me that the PMRC may have confused our video presentation for this song with the meaning of the lyrics. It's no secret that videos often depict storylines completely unrelated to the lyrics of the song they accompany. The video for We're Not Gonna Take It was simply meant to be a cartoon with human actors playing variations on the Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote theme. Each stunt was selected from my extensive personal collection of cartoons. You'll note when you watch the entire video that after each catastrophe our villain suffers through, in the next sequence he reappears unharmed by any previous attack, no worse for the wear. By the way, I'm very pleased to note that the United Way of America has been granted a request to use portions of our We're Not Gonna Take It video in a program they are producing on the subject of the changing American family. They asked for it because of its, quote, lighthearted way of talking about communicating with teenagers, unquote. It is gratifying that an organization as respected as the United Way of America appreciates where we're coming from. I've included a copy of the United Way's request as part of my written testimony. Thank you, United Way. Accusation number 3. Last Tuesday, a public forum regarding the lyric controversy was held in New York. Among the panelists was Ms. Gore. Trying to stem the virtual tidal wave of anti-rating sentiment coming from the audience, Ms. Gore made the following statement, quote, I agree this is a small percentage of all music, thank goodness, but it's becoming more mainstream. You look at even the t-shirts the kids are wearing, and you see Twisted Sister and a woman in handcuffs sort of spread-eagled, unquote. This is an outright lie. Not only have we never sold a shirt of this type, we have always taken great pains to steer clear of sexism in our merchandise, records, stage show, and personal lives. Furthermore, we have always promoted the belief that rock and roll should not be sexist, but should cater to males and females equally. I feel that an accusation of this type is irresponsible, damaging to our reputation, and slanderous. I defy Ms. Gore to produce such a shirt to back up her claim. I'm tired of running into kids on the street who tell me that they can't play our records anymore because of the misinformation their parents are being fed by the PMRC on TV and in the newspapers. These are the only 3 accusations I've come across. All 3 are totally unfounded. Who knows what other false and irresponsible things have been said about me or my band? There happens to be one area where I'm in complete agreement with the PMRC, as well as the National PTA and probably most of the parents on this committee. That is, it is my job as a parent to monitor what my children see, hear, and read during their preteen years. The full responsibility for this falls on the shoulders of my wife and I because there is no one else capable of making these judgments for us. Parents can thank the PMRC for reminding them that there is no substitute for parental guidance, but that is where the PMRC's job ends. The beauty of literature, poetry, and music is that they leave room for the audience to put its own imagination, experiences, and dreams into the words. The examples I cited earlier showed clear evidence of Twisted Sister's music being completely misinterpreted and unfairly judged by supposedly well-informed adults. We cannot allow this to continue. There is no authority who has the right or the necessary insight to make these judgments. Not myself, not the federal government, not some recording industry committee, not the PTA, not the RIAA, and certainly not the PMRC. I'd like to thank the committee for this time, and I hope my testimony will aid you in clearing up this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Snider.
Can I get a glass with some water, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a cameraman. You can do it. Thank you. Sorry.
Mr. Snider, let's suppose that there is music which, say, glorifies incest, not yours. Let's suppose that there is some music that glorifies incest. Do you think that, parents should know about it? Or do you think that it's just a matter between whoever's selling the record and whoever's buying it?
As I said in my testimony, I think it's very important that parents be aware of that these lyrics exist.
How could they find out about it?
Well, quite simply, as a parent myself and as a rock fan, I know that when I see an album cover with a severed goat's head in the middle of a pentagram between a woman's legs, that it's not the kind of album I want my son to be listening to.
Right.
If I read a title on the back of, say, somebody said Ice Cream Castle, a title called If the Kid Can't Make You Come, whatever it is, I realize that's a sexually explicit song. By just looking at the cover, looking at the lyrics, looking at the, I should say, the titles, that should cover just about all bases. The few albums that do not express their intentions on the cover or in the song titles, I think a parent could take it home, listen to it, and I don't think there's too many retail stores that would deny them the ability to return the album for something different.
Do you think that that most parents, or even kids for that matter, know everything that's on an album when they buy when a child buys an album?
I don't know half the things that are on half the albums I own.
Right.
Some of the bands I listen for musical reasons. Other bands I listen to for lyrical reasons. I know that AC/DC, one of my favorite bands, sings a lot of songs glorifying hell and damnation. I'm a Christian. I don't believe in, I don't want to go to hell, and I don't want to be damned for all time, but I do like the feel of the songs. The lyrics have no effect on me. Other bands who have more to say, I listen to their words and I learn from their words.
Do you think that now there is adequate basis for parents to know what's on the records that their kids are buying?
I think if they really are concerned, there is. But quite honestly, I don't think that the majority of parents are in reality as concerned as the PMRC or myself. I don't think they really want to spend the time to listen to what they might consider to be a bunch of noise. You know, they put it on and they can't understand the thing that's being said anyway. So I think most of them don't spend enough time with it.
Senator Hollings?
Yes, Mr. Snider, I think I'll just take the opportunity to make an observation because you and I would differ as to what's obscene or what's shocking or what's vulgar. And persons of goodwill will differ on that particular score. I think that somewhere in this hearing record, we should not be on the defensive and we shouldn't create the atmosphere that we're powerless. The absolute nature of your statement that we don't have any authority, I only want to refer everyone to the Pacifica Foundation case where the Federal Communications Commission was questioned as to its power to regulate public radio, TV broadcasts that was indecent but not obscene. You see, they differed between what was indecent, what was obscene, and what was shocking. They had the 7 dirty words. I think everyone remembers that case on the West Coast. And the Supreme Court of the United States found out positively the FCC had the authority, had the responsibility, and I'm quoting from the language of the Supreme Court, patently offensive, indecent material presented over the airwaves confronts the citizen not only in public, but also in the privacy of the home where the individual's right to be left alone plainly outweighs the First Amendment rights of an intruder. So this isn't just a forum to rally one way or the other and hope something happens. This is a forum with a definite responsibility with respect to Congress and enunciating the duties of the Federal Communications Commission, which have been constitutionally followed. So I understand your opinion, and that's why we invited you up here to hear your words and not mine, but I think that the general nature of all this testimony of nothing censorship, First Amendment absolutism does not pertain with respect to the broadcast media, and that's, of course, the main media, I guess you would agree, to actually sell the record, wouldn't it not be?
Yes, except I'd like to clarify something. I said no authority has the right or necessary insight. I didn't say you weren't able to. I said you don't have the right, or I don't have the right, or the RIAA. Also, we're talking about the airwaves as opposed to a person going with their money to purchase an album, to play in their room, their home, on their own time. The airwaves is something different. I think that the FCC and even MTV have done a fair job in keeping profanity, obscenity, and things like that off the public airwaves. But as far as what you listen to your own home, that's something totally different, I feel.
Yeah, I think that record ought to be elaborated to show just that. Previously, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, before this committee, we had the TV networks. And pursuant to that particular hearing, they again came back, I remember specifically CBS, and they demonstrated how they had this film, and then they got together with their producer and removed certain scenes of violence and certain 4-letter words and did not offend the producer's sense of art and the production itself. So we've made some progress, but bottom line with respect to these particular records, the Supreme Court has found that there is that right and that responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, are you going to tell me you're a big fan of my music as well?
No, I'm not a fan of your music.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gore.
I'm aware that Frank Zappa and John Denver cover quite a spectrum, and I do enjoy them both. I am not, however, a fan of Twisted Sister, and I will readily say that. Mr. Snider, what is the name of your fan club?
The fan club is called the SMF Friends of Twisted Sister.
And what does SMF stand for when it's spelled out?
It stands for the Sick Motherfucking Friends of Twisted Sister.
Is this also a Christian group?
I don't believe that profanity has anything to do with Christianity. Thank you.
That, it's just an interesting choice because I was getting the impression from your presentation that you were a very wholesome kind of performer, and that is an interesting title for your fan club. In Surge, you say your song, Under the Blade, is about surgery. Have you ever had surgery with your hands tied and your legs strapped?
The song was written about my guitar player, Eddie Ojeda. He was having polyps removed from his throat, and he was very fearful of this operation. And I said, Eddie, while you're in the hospital, I'm going to write a song for you. I said it was about the fear of operations. I think people imagine being helpless on a table, the bright light in their face, the blade coming down on them, and having totally afraid that they may wake up, who knows, dead, handicapped. There's a certain fear of hospitals. That's in my imagination, what I see the hospitals like.
Is there a reference to the hospital in the song?
No, there isn't, but there isn't a reference to a woman, sadomasochism, or bondage, yes, I'm sorry.
There's just a reference to someone whose hands are tied down and whose legs are strapped down, and he's going under the blade to be cut.
Yes, there is.
All right. So it's not really a wild leap of the imagination to jump to the conclusion that that's about something other than surgery or hospitals, neither of which are mentioned in the song.
No, it's not a wild jump, and I think what I said in one part was that songs allow a person to put their own imagination, experiences, and dreams into the lyrics. People can interpret it many ways. Ms. Gore was looking for sadomasochism and bondage, and she found it. Someone looking for surgical references would have found it as well.
Yeah. Why do you think there is so much sadomasochism and bondage in some of these new songs?
I cannot speak for the other artists. I'm only here to defend myself, and hopefully by speaking for myself as one person, songwriter in a band that I feel has been unjustly dumped on, that will just warn us of the dangers of what we're trying to do here. I really can't speak for the other bands.
Now, you made reference to a comment about T-shirts. I would simply note for the record that the word T-shirts was in plural, and one of them referred to a twisted sister, and the other referred to a woman in handcuffs, and was not intended, as I understand it, to say that you appear with a woman in handcuffs. In fact, there are a lot of different T-shirts and advertisements. In fact, I've noticed from some of the fan magazines of particularly heavy metal that little sadomasochistic outfits are advertised with the fingerless gloves and spikes and studs on them, and that these little S&M outfits are marketed to teens and preteens. Is that correct?
Well, they are marketed. Who buys them, I'm not sure. I'd just like to say, in reference to the comment about T-shirts, I have with me a taped cassette of the exact...
No, I'm reading from your transcript of it in your statement.
I have to check the transcript, but again, I'll say when it was said, there was no question she was referring to a Twisted Sister T-shirt. There was no question if I played the tape for anybody.
In your own transcript, it's plural T-shirts, and two examples are cited, but I don't want to belabor that point. Now, you said that you can look at the titles of albums and look at the covers and tell what kind of material is inside. Does the title Purple Rain give you an indication that the material is about masturbation?
Do you mean the album title, Purple Rain,
yeah,
not the song title?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. I didn't say in all cases. I believe I covered that, those occasional albums that are a bit misleading. That, like I said, I don't think a store would refuse a parent who came in and said, I don't like what's on this record, I would like my money back.
So the choice the parent has then is to sit down and listen to every song on the album, right?
Or read the lyrics if they're on the record.
What if they're not on the, I think there's pretty general agreement that if the lyrics are printed, that's one possible solution for this. Let's suppose the lyrics aren't printed. Then what choice does a parent have? To sit down and listen to every song on the album?
Well, if they're really concerned about it, I think that they have to.
Do you think that's reasonable to expect parents to do that?
Being a parent isn't a reasonable thing. It's a very hard thing. I'm a parent and I know. Okay, I'm a new parent. I only have one child maybe, but I am learning that there's a lot to being a parent that you didn't expect. It's not just, oh, isn't baby cute? There's a lot of labor and a lot of time and a lot of effort that goes into it. It's not totally pleasurable.
Yeah, and you'll find when they get a little bit older that when they're exposed to the kinds of themes that we were presented with earlier, that if you love your child, you're going to be concerned about that. And if you want to protect that child from unnecessary exposure to inappropriate material, you sometimes need a little help, the kind of guidance that is presented in the movie industry, and it is totally unreasonable, in my view, to expect parents to come and sit down and listen to every single song in the albums that their children buy in order to fulfill their responsibilities as parents. Now, the only thing that I felt at all comfortable about in your statement was when you said that you shared some of the concerns of the PMRC. I would simply hope that, or end by expressing the hope, because my time has expired, that artists and record companies will find a way to manifest that concern in some self-restraint and show of responsibility to give parents a break. You're right, it's tough being a parent. It's even tougher being a kid. If both are going to be able to deal with the kind of material that's coming out in popular music, it seems to me the industry has a responsibility to give them a little help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rockefeller.
Mr. Snider, how would you, do you feel that you have a responsibility as an artist in terms of those words that you write, a responsibility for those who would hear those words?
I feel a tremendous responsibility, and as I said, I don't put anything down on a record that I can't stand behind with my beliefs 100%. I don't sing about drugs, sex, alcohol, because I don't advocate sexism, the use of drugs, and drinking. So I don't write about those things. I only write about things I believe in.
And that's the way you define what your responsibility is? That is, not to write about things that you don't believe in?
Yeah, that's about that's how I define my responsibility. To write about things that you can stand behind. I feel myself to be a moral person, and I think that I have a lot of positive things to tell people about. And everything, like I said, on my records, I will stand there and say, yes, I wrote those words, and this is what it meant, and this is what I was trying to say, yes.
Do you think that, parents, not only those who are in PMRC, but other parents who are concerned here and across the country about the development of new trends in music and the lyrics that go along with that music are naive or somehow missing the point? Somehow missing the point. Do you think that they're unduly worried about the developments and writings about sadomasochism, suicide, rape, other things? I mean, do you think that's really not that serious a problem for this country and our young people?
That's like sort of a multiple question. I don't think they're naive, and I don't think that at times they're unduly worried, but I do think sometimes they take it overly serious. I mean, there are monster movies on all the time. They've been going on for ages, and people watch a monster movie and they get scared and they walk away, and it was just a movie. Rock and roll, in many times, is the same thing, trying to get an effect either of laughter, of sadness. A lot of the heavy metal bands are trying to scare people and just make them just like a horror movie. Vincent Price isn't getting have problems because he's done all these monster pictures. He's just an actor. I'm not going to say I'm just an actor, but I am entertaining people, and a lot of these bands are entertaining people. And when they were reading some of these lyrics before, I couldn't help but laugh. I mean, I hadn't heard some of them, but some of the lyrics were ridiculously ridiculous. I mean, you know, and a kid, even a kid reading that, I think would go, oh my God, what's going on? You know, it's ridiculous. The only word I can think of. Some of the lyrics.
The vehemence with which you attacked Senator Gore's wife, I detected sort of a defensiveness somehow on your part, sort of a lack of unsureness of where you stand in this. Why did you feel it necessary to attribute some of the qualities to her that you did? Why was that important to your testimony?
First of all, I wasn't attacking Senator Gore's wife. I was attacking a member of the PMRC. Okay, those two.
Senator Gore's wife by name.
No, her name is Tipper Gore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't say the senator's wife. I said Tipper Gore, okay? Secondly, defensive. I've been working very hard. I believe in the music I play. I believe we have a very bad reputation, and I've been doing a lot on my part to try and say, hey, this isn't a bad thing. This is fun. This is fantasy. Kids are coming out, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're letting out their emotions, and they're going home and they're feeling better because they let out a lot of their frustrations. As I said, I pride myself on writing lyrics that are not offensive and that are saying something positive. Most of my songs are about personal freedom. And when somebody tells me, after all I've done to fight against sexism, that I've got a shirt with a spread eagle woman, or it says...
To fight what?
All I've done to fight sexism. We steer clear. The whole Twisted Sister thing is a very ambiguous. Guys wearing makeup, we don't act like women, we act like men. We don't cater to the males or females in the audience. It's just one audience. So when someone says there's a song about sadomasochism and bondage, or someone says we're not going to take it, is violent lyrical content, which is what it's been rated for, yes, I'm defensive. Yes, that gets me angry. I'm trying to get adults to see that heavy metal is not totally a bad thing.
How many months in the course of a year do you spend on the road away from home?
In the course of a year, it would be tough to say. Over a 2-year period, because I would spend about 11 months on the road and 13 months at home recording an album, things like that, doing videos.
11 months on the road in a 2-year period?
Yeah, because you do a tour and then you go in and record albums. I've been off the road now for 10 months.
You take your child with you?
He comes sometimes, some of the shows.
When your child, 9 years from now, when your child is 12 and in school, will you take your child with you?
Absolutely.
When your child's in school?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying. No, I would not take him out of school.
Then how will it be possible for you to, as a responsible parent, to spend the time that you suggest going through and listening to these records and finding out what it is that you want your son to listen to and what you don't want him to listen to?
To be perfectly honest, 9 years from now, I'm going to be well retired. And I'll be spending more time with my son than any other parent probably ever spends. That's one of the beautiful things about rock and roll, is that I can retire hopefully at a very early age. But even now, I'm very lucky that I have a wife who I've been going with for 10 years now. We've been married for 4, who is just an incredible mother. And she, when I'm gone, fills the role, has a very difficult job too, of mother and father.
Does she go through these, do you expect later on then that she'll be going through these records?
I think both of us will be doing that.
You expect me to believe that?
Oh, you can. I'm terminally teenage. I'll be listening to my son's records. And
what about parents where both parents have to work, which is an increasing phenomenon in this country now, because they have to survive? And the whole notion of parents sitting down and listening to record after record, tape after tape, doesn't that really strike you, and that's what you suggested, doesn't that strike you as just a little bit naive and unrealistic?
No, I don't, because I know the reality of the record buying market. As a record buyer, with my allowance, I was able to, if I was lucky, afford maybe 1 album a week at the most. Usually it was 1 a month. Albums cost anywhere from $6 to $10, and that's a lot of money to a teenager, to a pre-teenage. It's a ridiculous sum. To a teenage kid, you know, that's a considerable amount of money. So to listen to 1 record a week, I don't consider that a hardship.
Senator
May I
Pressler?
ask just one final question, Mr. Chairman?
Bearing in mind that it's 12:30 and we have a lot of witnesses left, yes.
Well, then I won't ask the question. I'll bear that in mind and won't ask the question.
Thank you. Senator Pressler?
Well, basically, I want to get down to your recommendations. In terms of governmental action, be either by this committee or by any government body, you would recommend no governmental action in this area?
Absolutely.
What about industry actions? What would you recommend any type of voluntary labeling?
I don't feel the industry, it's been expressed by many other people, but each artist has an individual agreement. And one of the big things is artistic freedom in your contract. I don't think the industry can pass a ruling on that.
So your legislative recommendations, would that apply just to, not to broadcast? You would put broadcast and things that are over the airwaves in a different category than things people buy and show in their homes.
Well, I think we're talking about the purchase of albums and the lyrical content on the album, so that's what I'm directing it to at this time.
Okay, so you would disagree with any action on those albums, be they by private industry or government, any type of labeling?
If somebody was to ask me what my opinion was, I had said earlier that I didn't think there'd be a problem for a parent to return an album that they had taken home and found it dissatisfactory. I'd like to believe that, but some retail stores will give you a hassle if you try to return an open album. If you want a solution, maybe they could bring back, in the 50s, you could listen to an album in the store before you purchase the album. Most record stores play the albums in the store, and there's usually a stack of those albums opened already that if you wanted to go over and take a glance at the cover, which I've done many times myself, you could go over and do that. So if you want to take some sort of industry action, I would think it would be to force the retail stores to allow people to return product that they're not satisfied with. Satisfaction guaranteed.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Snider, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
The next witness is Mrs. Millie Waterman, National PTA Vice President for Legislative Activity. All right, if those who are leaving would please leave as quickly and quietly as possible, I would very much appreciate it.
Move along quickly. Camp down. That's a relief, though, for you and me to get that many others. It's going to make it going from here on out a lot easier. A lot of it's press. To the field. Tired.
Mrs. Waterman, thank you very much for being here. Please proceed.
Thank you, Senator. I have accompanying with me Mr. Arnold Faggy, Director of Governmental Relations for the National PTA. I ask that he sit up here with me. Mr. Chairman, members of the Subcommittee on Communications, I thank you for this opportunity to address the issue of record and cassette lyric labeling. I am Millie Waterman, Vice President for Legislative Activity for the National PTA, the nation's largest volunteer child advocacy association comprising 5.6 million members in over 25,000 local units in 50 state congresses, the District of Columbia, and Europe. The National PTA is a nonprofit organization interested in the protection of health, education, and welfare of children and youth. Throughout the history of recorded music, there have been complaints about the contents of some songs. The outcry over music lyrics began to rise with the introduction of rock and roll more than 30 years ago.
Mr. Chairman, could we, I'm having trouble hearing
All right, if you'd withhold, Mr. Waterman, I want to apologize for the noise. If the officer could keep the door closed, I'd very much appreciate it. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Throughout the history of recorded music, there have been complaints about the contents of some songs. The outcry over music lyrics began to rise with the introduction of rock and roll. While parents and others interested in the well-being of children have continued to voice their concern, the recording industry took no action to address this current concern until August of 1985. Briefly, the problem is that there are many songs which include lyrics that may not be appropriate for young children or that send messages that may be dangerous to individuals or society. Some examples of songs that might be inappropriate for children are those that contain profane language, sexual references, vulgarity, or violence. Those that could be dangerous to individuals or society include songs that promote suicide, practice of occult, rape, incest, murder, or bondage, among others. Until now, no one has suggested a reasonable solution to the problem. By reasonable, we mean a solution that would not involve any form of censorship, but would protect consumers from exposure to materials they feel may be harmful to themselves or children. Until 1984, no specific proposals were made or acted upon by either the public or the industry, at least none that we know of that didn't involve censorship. In June of 1984, the National PTA's convention body, representing the 5.6 million members of the PTA, adopted a resolution which points out that an unsuspecting public may buy records, tapes, and cassettes which contain explicit language, sexual references, and inferences to situations not commonly recommended for all age groups. Further, it addressed the fact that there is currently no rating system in use for evaluating the content of recordings, nor any markings on jackets or covers to indicate the content. The resolution calls on the PTA to encourage record companies to consider the explicit contents of some songs and their responsibility to an unsuspecting public. It also calls for recording companies to label record, tape, and cassette covers and to indicate the nature of the questionable content. In October of 1984, the president of the National PTA sent a letter to 30 record companies and the Recording Industry Association of America, explaining the resolution and suggesting that the industry convene a panel of consumer, industry, and recording artist representatives to establish standards that all record companies could apply to determine which recordings need to bear a warning label. Because our proposal to establish standards has been met with misunderstanding and confusion in the music industry, I'd like to clarify it for this committee. We are not suggesting that the panel review every new song and rate it accordingly. We are suggesting that the panel produce written guidelines that each record company can follow to evaluate its own products. The need for such standard was made clear in a response sent to the National PTA by the recording industry president, Stanley Gortikov, on November 16, 1984, which said, quote, "There are wide variations company to company within our industry in respect to artists, contractual relationships, marketing considerations, and product services," unquote. With such different practices among companies, different standards might be applied to labeling records, which would only confuse the consumer and therefore provide minimal benefit. In May of 1985, the president of the National PTA invited the presidents or representatives of 62 record companies and the recording industry to meet with the PTA representatives at a luncheon in New York City, which was scheduled for May 30th. Only 7 companies replied, and all declined to attend. However, 3 companies did offer to meet with the PTA privately to discuss the issues involved. Due to scheduling conflicts, those meetings have not yet been arranged. In August of 1985, The recording industry announced that it had received agreement from 19 record companies to label recordings they deemed appropriate with a warning of some kind. The suggested wording offered was parental guidance, explicit lyrics. We view this as a very positive step by the music industry. It demonstrates that the industry finally recognizes there is a serious problem that affects millions of music consumers and that this problem must be addressed.
Mrs. Waterman, I'm sorry to say that your time has expired. The rest of your statement will be included in the record. Would you like to just make one very brief summary statement?
Well, we would like to make it very clear, Mr. Chairman, that the National PTA in no way would encourage or support censorship, but we are asking that warning labels be voluntarily placed upon the package and it be undertaken by the music industry themselves. We do believe it is a responsibility of parents to control the types of music materials they listen to in their homes, but when they do not know what they purchase, there is nothing on the package to let them know, then that unsuspecting parent, child, or public buys something that they don't know what's in it. We are delighted to be able to testify today, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
You do not believe that under the present state of affairs, sufficient information is available to parents to allow them to participate in the decision as to what's in their home?
No, sir. There is nothing as you buy a record or a tape or cassette on most records that allows you to know what is in that. And we believe that there should be a label so that they know what they purchase.
Do you think it's realistic to expect parents to actually sit down and play the rock music that is going into the home?
Do I believe they should play every record before
Do you think it's realistic to expect that they will?
I think that when they bring that back, when they themselves buy it, if they know what it is.
If a child brings a record into the home, do you think that as a practical matter, the parents are going to be sitting down and listening to the record?
I think that parents want to be good parents. Right now they're blindfolded, Mr. Chairman, by when they purchase a record, a tape, or cassette. They do not know what's in it. And I say take the blindfold off of those parents and let them know what they buy. Then it is their responsibility of what they play within that home.
Senator Hollings?
Well, I thank Ms. Waterman, Mr. Chairman, and yield my time.
Senator Gore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to note for the record that the National PTA was really the first organization to really make this a major concern. And in October of 1984, you passed a resolution at your national convention. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
And you then, as a result of that resolution, you then contacted the major record companies and asked them for a response to your request that they voluntarily put ratings on albums. Is that
correct.
Right?
That is correct.
And how many of the major record companies responded to that letter from the National PTA?
I think I told you in my testimony about 7 or 8. Very few of them. And the meetings, of course, never came off. 7 companies replied, sir.
7 companies?
Yes.
Out of all those to whom you mailed. And did any of them respond favorably?
No.
None of them did. You asked for a meeting, is that right?
That's right.
But that
meeting has never taken place, sir.
Did you get the feeling you were being kind of stonewalled by the industry, or that they were resisting any effort to engage in a dialogue with you?
You would have that feeling. However, 19 companies have agreed that there would be some kind of labeling, parental guidance, explicit lyrics. So there is a movement of concern, certainly, if those 19 have agreed.
Do you share the concern of the PMRC that if these companies are going to voluntarily label, the set of criteria governing when a label is appropriate and when it is not should be industry-wide and not just according to the different criteria of each individual company?
Senator Gore, we feel that a panel of the music industry should sit down and do their guidelines and standards so that all of them are on the same. Otherwise, it would not, one company would be one way, one would be the other. It needs to be uniformed.
Now, although there are some differences between the remedies you've suggested and those suggested by the PMRC, if I'm correct, you have sat down with them and worked out a common approach that meets the concerns of both groups. Is that correct?
The president of the National PTA has had a meeting with the PMRC, and we agree on three things. I felt that the agreement was on the need for labeling, the need for lyrics to be placed so that a parent or a buyer could see what they were, and also the panel need to be convened of the music industry, that it be voluntarily done.
Well, I want to congratulate you for the leadership offered by the PTA in this matter. And I hope you will keep it up, and I hope you'll carry that message to your local chapters throughout the country. And thank you very much for appearing
Thank you,
here.
Senator Gore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Regal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been involved this morning in the Banking Committee, as you may know, with the nominee for the position of head of the FDIC, and we've also had the Social Security issue on the Senate floor, at least prospectively, and so that has occupied myself and others of us. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Chairman, and on the basis of the response, I may want to pose another question to the witness. Has an argument been advanced as to why rating systems have been and seem to be effectively used in rating motion pictures and therefore can't as readily be adapted to records? I mean, is there been any convincing reason presented as to why it can be done apparently with some effectiveness in that area of creative material and not as readily done in the record area?
Very little discussion of the relationship between ratings of motion pictures and ratings of records. Some reference to it, but I'd say very little real discussion of it.
And I take it that the position that's been advanced by the record spokesmen that have appeared is to the effect that full disclosure, any kind of a presenting and writing of the lyrics when we have material that would be in this area that would be offensive to many people, that the full disclosure is somehow seen as an invasion of rights. Is that the thrust of the argument that's been advanced?
I am hesitant to characterize other people's arguments. Mr. Zappa took the position that the printing of lyrics would be something that would be satisfactory to him. He thought that a rating system would be arbitrary and would falsely impugn the integrity of people in the music business.
Well, it seems to me that bridge has been crossed in the motion picture business, in effect. Now, the two are not exactly the same, but I think the proposition is essentially the same. Would it be the view of the National PTA that having taken that step with respect to motion pictures and now having a system there, which seems to have met with the general acceptance by both artists and movie makers as well as the public, that would be an example of why something that is the equivalent of that for recordings, when we talk about material that many people find very offensive, would work just as readily in the record business? Would that be your view?
I think what we're asking for, Senator, is a rating system. You know, the National PTA has been on record over the years on their concern on television violence, on their concern on movies, and we did ask for a rating system in movies. We are not asking for a rating system or label on the records of restricting age. What we are asking is that that label does provide the consumer who wishes to buy or chooses not to, that he knows what's within that record. So we would not be putting age on it. But the National PTA has been on record in their protection of children and youth over nearly 90 years now in their concern on media. And we have no way ever encouraged censorship, but I've always asked that the private industry limit themselves to knowing what is good and have a responsibility to society and children. And the National PTA in the 1984 convention took this step because they were very concerned on what their children were hearing on records and what they, as a parent, when they went to buy, had no way of knowing.
how do you envision, or how does the National PTA envision the best way, if standards are going to be established, measurement standards that would be the foundation of a rating system, how would you see that done?
Well, the industry is going to have to clean their own house, just to be very frank. We have asked for a voluntary panel of the music industry that they can choose their own people to set up their guidelines and their standards, and we would certainly work with them in any way that we could. And we hope that this is done. I think there's been some concern voiced here today. I've listened very intently to the artists and to the PMC and to everyone else that has testified. And there obvious has been on this panel also concern on what this hearing is all about. I think that we will come to a responsible solution to this.
So the PTA is not suggesting any kind of a system as to how these ratings would be done, or what they would be, or what would be included or left out, but rather that you would like to see the industry, the recording industry and the artists, sit down together and develop their own methodology. Is that the idea? Then basically the PTA would be happy to react to it, but that you're not trying to put yourself in that standard-setting business. Is that
Senator,
what you're saying?
I think to answer your question completely, the resolution spoke very clearly to the rating, the label that should be violence or profanity or sex or alcohol or drugs. The knowing what's in the package was very important to the people of that convention, of which there were thousands. Now, when we are saying and adding that we believe voluntarily, we are hoping that the music industry will set up this panel, will set up their guidelines and their standards, and that it will be pleasing to all of us who are concerned.
My time's expired at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Waterman, for your testimony and for your patience in waiting so long to testify.
Thank you for the forum.
The next witness is Mr. Stanley Gortikov, President, Recording Industry Association of America. Mr. Gortikov, thank you for your patience. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Your staff has advised me that I have 10 minutes for my statement. I am Stanley Gortikov, President of the Recording Industry Association of America, and our member companies, which I represent today, create and market about 85% of the recordings sold in the United States. We understand, of course, that this hearing was called to respond to the express protests of the Parents Music Resource Center relating to the content of rock music recordings. And to confront that challenge, of course, each record company may exercise its own discretion. However, 24 of our member companies have reached consensus to foster a fair balance between the concerns of the PMRC and those of the recording companies, performers, creators, and music buyers and listeners. Briefly summarized, the PMRC desires recording companies to be sensitive to younger children in regard to the explicit content of certain recordings, and to provide the means by which parents may exercise reasonable discretion over such recordings. In response to that basic quest of the PMRC, let me tell you what recording companies are able and willing to do, what they cannot or will not do, and why. First, what we can and will do. To begin, we respect those parental concerns. Our constructive response is this. On future releases containing explicit lyrics, recording companies individually will include a packaging inscription that will state parental guidance, explicit lyrics. This will highlight such content for any concerned parent to exercise discretion. And that move by the recording companies directly addresses the core concern of the PMRC. For the record companies, this is a significant step which we do approach, though, with trepidation. It is as far as we can and should go. The described parental guidance inscription is not a universally popular solution. Many feel that the inscription goes too far and represents caving in to the PMRC. Creative people are saying so, and you heard that. So are thoughtful journalists and media responses, some of which accompany our written statement. But there are some PMRC recommendations that we just cannot accommodate. The first relates to ratings. We will not rate the 25,000 new recorded songs we release each year as originally requested by the PMRC. We would not even know how, let alone trust anointed experts to do so. By whose standards would such ratings be determined? For what audience ages? For what religious, geographic, and societal backgrounds? For what degree of permissiveness or stricture? Nor will we, by separate ratings, differentiate between violent, sexual, substance abuse, or occult content. I doubt if any really concerned parent needs to favor or deplore any one of those categories over the others. However, if the PMRC or any other organization really wants ratings, it is free to set up its own private system, just as the Catholic Church has done for movies. Second, in respect to lyrics, we cannot consistently imprint on the outside of recordings the lyrics of the songs within or reproduce them for broadcasters. Music publishers usually own those rights, not record companies. Further, we cannot commit 50% of the space available on an LP jacket to lyrics alone, and cassettes are just too small to permit lyric display. Third, in respect to in-store, the PMRC has asked that retailers be required to place explicit recordings behind counters or in special wrappers, and to keep a master set of all lyrics on hand in stores. Recording companies do not have such rights or control. Retailers run their own businesses. Many are self-service with inadequate staffs to implement such actions. They also must serve the needs of the 95% of their music purchasers who are not younger children. What I've just presented then summarizes what recording companies can and cannot do. Nevertheless, to our planned parental guidance inscription, the PMRC has said it is not enough. PMRC instead wants an industry panel to prepare common qualifications for such an inscription. Again, what superior wisdom would any such panel possess to proclaim a national standard for our diverse populace? The PMRC itself has not needed guidelines to identify lyrics they have exposed to you here today. No star panel can make endless laundry lists of no-nos that can handily apply to every future lyric written. Lyrics just do not come only in the convenient form of four-letter words. They deal with interpretations, imagery, allusions. And a master bank of right, wrong, or good, bad characterizations is likely to become a first step towards censorship, a concept which is abhorrent and fundamentally inconsistent with creative freedom and American values. In this hearing today, you have heard some understandable protests by the PMRC. We plan to act upon these concerns seriously. However, I also must spotlight 5 equally important truths that are essentially ignored by the PMRC in its media pronouncements, but hopefully which will be recognized by this committee. The first relates to unfairness. The sheer number of offensive recordings is minute compared with the total mass of recordings released by the industry. Yet the narrow targeting of the PMRC unfairly characterizes all artists and all companies as universal practitioners of evil. Second, positives. Whereas some lyrics may be objectionable, the mass of lyrics reflects either pure entertainment or socially positive attitudes and practices. If recordings do in fact affect young minds as maintained by the PMRC, then the heavy thrust of our industry's input is positive, not negative. Other forces? The PMRC, and therefore this committee, is focusing solely on rock music. But why is only rock music unfairly singled out for the scrutiny of the PMRC and the United States Senate, while all other explicit negative influences on younger children go untargeted? What about movies and magazine ads, primetime television, soap operas, books, cable programs? If there is to be a review of negative forces in the environment of younger children, let it be a review of all such forces, not one which focuses on rock music alone. If the PMRC somehow were to be able to purify all music according to its own standards, who's going to purify the remainder of their children's world? Fourth, behavior. The PMRC concentrates on modes of human behavior that it finds objectionable. But those realities are not invented by record companies, songwriters, or performers. Adults in the society, some of them parents, are the real initiators of those extremes. Recorded music reflects rather than introduces society's values and the realities of human conduct, both good and bad. And last, in respect to rights, although in this forum we address the rights of parents and younger children, we cannot submerge the rights of others. We're on delicate ground here in respect to censorship and the First Amendment. We must not trample the rights of parents and other adults whose standards do not coincide with those of the PMRC or any other group. Further, recording artists and songwriters have their own rights and freedoms of expression, and even have contractual protections that legally must be respected. We must assure that the noble intentions of the PMRC do not somehow get translated into a dilution of the rights and freedoms of others. Those 5 realities which I have just articulated merit the consideration of this committee too. And as to the PMRC, I am getting a little apprehensive about its motives and fervor. Recording companies have offered to meet the core concern of the PMRC, yet without waiting to see even how the program operates, they tell us that's not good enough. The PMRC has said clearly it does not want censorship, but I fear that the only acceptable translation of the wishes of the PMRC will somehow constitute a de facto first stage form of censorship. The PMRC now seems committed to impose its will on an entire creative community and on broadcasters, on record retailers, and thus on all who buy and hear recorded music. The PMRC seeks to revamp the structural patterns of an industry, to hold our feet to the fire. As the PMRC expands its actions and themes, its medium is becoming more vital than its message. I appeal to the PMRC by saying, enough already. I hope it takes pride in what it has spotlighted and achieved, and in the response it definitely has triggered. I hope it does not allow a thirst for press, public, and government attention to gain priority over the olive branch we offer. The members of the PMRC are parents. I and many of my colleagues are parents too. The PMRC has no monopoly on love and concern for kids. Child supervision is my personal parental responsibility, and the degrees of control versus freedom are mine alone to set. I certainly would not be content to assign any part of my responsibility to some outside surrogate like a record company, a radio station, a censorship panel, a government body, or a parent organization. Thank you.
Well, I have a couple. No, we're not going to have applause. I have a couple of comments for you, Mr. Gortikov, and then a couple of questions. You say that that the PMRC is holding your feet to the fire, the record company's feet to the fire. They're doing that by publicizing the problem, right?
By publicizing the problem?
Yes. I mean, you don't object to anybody publicizing their concerns, do you?
No, but it's the degree, the narrowness of the focus, the ignoring
But
those...
I mean, why shouldn't anybody publicize any problem that occurs to them? If people are concerned about values in a society, if they're concerned about what's available to their kids, why shouldn't they publicize it? The whole music industry lives on publicity, thrives on publicity. Why shouldn't concerned parents be able to publicize their problems as well and their concerns?
I'm not saying they shouldn't, but by the same token, I want to publicize to you these other aspects that put this thing in proper perspective.
Well, I'm glad you're here, but I mean, I don't think that it's right to attack I mean, you can attack anybody you want. It's your time as the witness, but it seems to me that it's perfectly reasonable and even commendable for concerned parents to say, wait a second, we're concerned about what's going on in this country and we're going to call attention to it. We're not going to sweep it under the rug. We're not going to leave this just a matter between record companies and teenage kids. We're going to talk about it and bring it out in the open, and that's how we're going to try to hold people's feet to the fire, just by publicizing it. That's reasonable, I think.
It's reasonable, providing the perspective is accurate. The perspective has not been.
Well, do you deny the testimony of the PMRC and the lyrics that they read to us this morning? I mean, it just seems to me that That's there, just a matter of objective fact. The lyrics are there. Those lyrics are being sold to whoever wants to walk into a store and buy them.
You're absolutely right, and they focus on the negative impact of those lyrics as they see it on their children. What they don't say, for example, is take the We Are the World record. I promise you that their children learned more from the USA for Africa We Are the World record. In respect to, please, may I finish?
Of course.
In respect to generosity, giving, caring, brotherhood, sacrifice, those positive messages are just as important as the negative ones, and I only ask perspective and balance.
I think it was absolutely commendable, that record, and I've said so many times. But I also think that I mean, it is reasonable for parents to express concern and to do so very openly if records, in fact, suggest or even glorify incest or violence or suicide.
Well, what we are espousing, we have taken action in response to that. We're not sitting here saying, ignoring what has been said, what has been publicized. We are taking action. We ask that that action be given a chance in the marketplace to work.
Now, if a PG rating, if some sort of rating were given records, there would have to be some basis for giving it, wouldn't there? I mean, you wouldn't just draw names out of a hat. There would be some basis for determining what got the label and what didn't, right?
Yes.
Who would decide that?
The individual companies would decide, in putting the parental guidance inscription on, the individual companies would make the determination that a given record with explicit content in these various areas that have been mentioned would warrant the inscription.
What if the company's whole business is to try to make as much money as possible by selling smut?
It may even decide that, and you may even find that the application of this inscription will enhance, not deter sales.
It might, but what if it were to determine that it was deleterious to record sales, and that it wasn't going to apply the record, the label at all? Then what would you do?
Then what
would your suggestion be?
Well, if a company chooses to ignore and not apply this or do it unfairly, I have a hunch the PMRC would rise again and approach you and approach the public for a redress. But give it a chance to work. Let's not decide in front that the intentions or motivations or effects of the program will not work. That's unfair.
Well,
it's a judgmental and it's an imperfect system.
Well, I mean, I can't blame them for being a little bit wary about the motives of record companies that are right now making their profits by peddling lyrics that glorify rape and incest and drugs and suicide and violence to children. Why should they feel that that's any great custodian of the values of their kids?
Yeah, but on the other hand, they are not saying that the content of records should be changed. They're only asking that they be identified.
Yes, but they're asking that somebody assume responsibility for identifying them, and I don't think that there's much basis for feeling that the record companies are terribly responsible.
Then,
I mean, why would somebody who is making a profit selling records glorifying incest be a responsible body to disclose anything?
Why is the motion picture industry, which rates itself, responsible?
Does each company rate itself?
The Motion Picture Association itself rates its own.
Well, you don't want your association to rate anybody. You want each company to do it individually.
Because I don't think there are standards that can be developed for lyrics. Lyrics are not like motion pictures. Standards, precise standards, cannot be developed for language.
Well, nothing's precise, but I think that, I mean, it's just clear to me that I mean, what we heard today, it is so clearly pornographic, obscene, that it doesn't take too much guessing in that case, does it?
No, it isn't. That's why I say there'd be no problem in attaching the inscription. For example, every lyric that was exposed here today would certainly qualify. And I've even suggested to the PMRC that if it has a preferred set of standards or guidelines, give them to me. Let me communicate those to the record companies. I have not had a response on that.
Well, I think you've come some distance, but it seems to me that looking at it from the standpoint of what we heard earlier today, it really is not adequate to just say every record company does whatever it wants by way of labeling.
No, every record company would apply an inscription when the content of lyrics is explicit. I don't think it's very difficult to determine when lyric content is explicit any more than the PMRC has had any problem in determining the explicitness of the items that were aired here today.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There are some spokesmen for the industry who, because of the length of this witness list, understandably could not be included. One of them is George David Weiss, president of the Songwriters Guild of America. And he prepared a very short 2.5-page statement, which, with your permission and with unanimous consent, I would like to put into the record. Thank you. Mr. Gortikov, your exchanges with the chairman have illuminated the degree to which your industry has been willing to respond to the concerns expressed about explicit lyric content. I'd like to follow along with the train of questioning begun by the chairman. You have recognized that there are legitimate concerns on the part of parents, correct?
Correct.
You have recognized that the industry has some responsibility to help parents in fulfilling their own responsibility as parents, correct?
Correct.
Where you begin to part ways with the PMRC and the PTA and others is in your refusal to acknowledge that the industry as a whole has such a responsibility. Your position is that 24 companies should apply 24 different sets of criteria in determining what material warrants a label and what material does not, correct?
No. I don't think there will be 24 different sets of criteria. I think it will be a simple problem to identify the type of material that was exposed to you today, just as the PMRC has exposed that to you. I see no problem in doing that. If it doesn't work, then some corrective action might be appropriate, but give it a chance.
Well, either the industry feels a sense of responsibility or it does not. If it does, then the key question is, why can't the industry get together and develop an industry-wide set of criteria, the same way the movie industry does, the same way dozens of industries around this country meet what they conceive to be their responsibilities to the public in a collective way. If you just leave it up to each individual company, then those who have been least responsible in the past are going to be the least responsible in the future. If, on the other hand, there is an industry-wide recognition that there is some responsibility to the public, then the industry ought to be willing to convey that sense of responsibility to its individual members.
I go back to my testimony. You're dealing with lyrics. You're not dealing with motion pictures, which have a precise image. We're dealing with lyrics here. And I think that there is no problem in a record company identifying what is or is not explicit sexuality or explicit violence. I don't see a problem here.
Well, some would say that...
And other than a set of guidelines is going to say, we will identify explicit sexuality, we will identify explicit violence, when you get into words, how are you going to convert that to a precise set of guidelines? I think it is impossible to do.
Some would say that it's even more difficult to engage in such a task with visual images in the movies than it is with the lyric.
Well, I've been told by the executive rating entity of the Motion Picture Association that it has no written guidelines. That what it does is subjective and judgmental to the best of its degree, of its capability.
But
so
they
it does not have any guidelines.
They haven't. Do they not have an industry-wide standard?
They don't have any guidelines that develop what
now,
those
wait a minute.
ratings are.
The individual movie companies don't rate their own movies, do they?
No, their association does.
And according to an industry-wide sense of what is appropriate, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They state that they have no such guidelines, that it is judgment on the part of the 6 or 7 raters as to whether a motion picture qualifies for a certain age exposure.
Well, I can't believe that it is a totally ad hoc approach. I mean, they have...
well, this was what I was told by a senior executive as recently as yesterday.
Well, I mean, they have specific categories. And there have been debates about the appropriateness of a movie falling into one category or another, and appeals, and there's a dialogue about where it fits. But when that dialogue takes place, it is the industry as a whole which is making the decision. Here, you're suggesting that each individual company make that judgment on its own. And what I'm saying in response is, the ones that have been really irresponsible in promoting suicide and all the other things that we've heard here, those companies are going to be the least likely to exhibit a sense of responsibility on their own. Don't you agree with that?
Not necessarily, I don't, because of the records that you have exposed here today. I'm quite sure, although I don't know the company that originates each one of them, but it does represent a spectrum of a wide range of industry companies. So the motivation, and those same companies produce a wide array of records that would not so qualify for exposure here today.
While it seems like and I'll finish up very quickly, Mr. Chairman, I know my time is up. To a small degree, it seems to me that your industry has been forthcoming, and no one should minimize the fact that you have said these companies will be willing on their own to have labels. But there are two problems with it that I see, without getting into the suggestion from Mr. Zappa and others that the lyrics be printed, and I agree with that. I think that should be done. But there are two problems with your specific proposal. Number one, there's no industry-wide acceptance of responsibility.
That's not true.
Well, but you're saying that the individual companies are going to do it on their own.
That, in aggregate,
and only some of them.
That, in aggregate, constitutes an acceptance. I haven't had any turn me down, and these companies, these 24 companies, represent somewhere between 80 and 85% of the totality of the industry.
Yeah.
All companies in the industry are not our members. I can't speak for them.
Well, secondly, the wording of the label you have suggested translates into PG, basically, parental guidance, which has become associated over the years in the minds of the public with material in the movie industry which is generally considered suitable for young children. There's been a kind of an erosion of the meaning of PG, I guess. But, 5, 6-year-olds will routinely watch PG movies, and their parents have come to feel, in many cases, that, well, PG means maybe one or two bad words, or not, it's not really a bad thing. But the material we saw this morning, if translated into the sphere of the movie industry, would be X, or certainly R, and if you are going to only have one label, shouldn't it be one that does not engender confusion in the minds of parents who might equate that parental guidance with the same meaning that it has acquired through the long experience of the movie industry?
We were not proposing to use PG. We were using the full language, parental guidance, explicit lyrics. The words parental guidance we lifted right out of communications I received from the PMRC, and on that, the choice of words was predicated. So it was not intended to relate or not to relate to the motion picture.
But I take it, just in brief conclusion, that that's a matter that you're still engaged in some dialogue about. Is that correct?
Well, we felt that it was adequate. If it isn't, then we have to go back to the drawing boards.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Regal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think as this discussion goes along that I think most people would agree that in the end we don't want to end up with some legislated standard or framework here. I think what we want to try to do in the kind of society we have is to work this out in some way other than that. And I think the industry association should properly take the lead, and I appreciate the fact that you're here. But I'd like to make a couple suggestions to you, because I don't think what you've said today is as adequate as it needs to be. I've listened very carefully to what you've said, and you've said in effect that you think each of the companies can figure this out for themselves, what explicit material is, and to make that judgment. If that's so, then I think the association as a whole can just as readily do it, and you can decide as a body what in fact meets that test of explicit material or lyrics, and establish that as a standard on your own to keep other people out of it. But I think you do have a responsibility to do it within the industry, and I think it ought to apply industry-wide. And I don't think you should have a situation where different companies can go a different way, and in a sense do something that if they decide to not honor that or the feeling that meets the general sense within the industry, then the whole industry in a sense falls under the shadow of that kind of an extreme judgment. So I think if your association has any meaning and power, you ought to step up to that, and you ought to do it before somebody else tries to do it for you. So I would just suggest that you do that. I don't think that's I don't think the difference between what you say you want to do and what I think that would help you do is all that great, but I think it would be an important step. Secondly, I think where there are explicit lyrics, I think there ought to be a written text, and I think you ought to provide it, and I don't think there's any excuse for not doing it other than cost. And I would say that if we're going to have material coming out, and these are not cheap items, these things, the records, whether they're singles or albums, carry a high enough price tag that if it costs an extra 5 cents or 3 cents or whatever it does on the margin to print out what the text is when you have explicit material, I think it ought to be there. I think that's another obligation, and that still leaves it with the public to make a judgment and decide what they want to buy or not want to buy. But to simply say they're explicit lyrics and not have a way for somebody to see what that means and whether or not in the sense of a particular family or parent where they would decide that that is something that they would encourage their children to have or not encourage their children to have. If in fact you're saying there are explicit lyrics here, but we're not going to tell you what it is, you've got to actually take and listen to the record. I don't think that's sufficient. I think in that case, and I gather Frank Zappa took that position earlier, that he had no problem when that exists of having it printed out. And if it costs you 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cents more to put that on the inside of the record cover, I think you ought to do it. I just think you ought to do it. That falls, in my view, in the area of full disclosure. And again, it doesn't tell people how they should make the judgment, but at least puts people in a position to be able to make an informed judgment. So, and I want to make an additional point with respect to the movies, because you were talking about the fact that there is a difference here. Well, obviously there is normally a verbal side to the movie, or there is the sound side to the movie as well as what one sees on the screen, whereas, of course, if we're just talking about a record, it would be the lyrics, and you would not, of course, have the video part of it. But it seems to me that if they're able to set, in a sense, an industry-wide standard, albeit with, I gather, 400 movies a year versus maybe 25,000 records, so we're talking about a much bigger task within the record industry, they have found a way within their industry association to set up a working rating system far more complex than you're talking about. They have a variety of grades, and as was said, it's not just PG, but they have X-rated, and they have various ratings along the way. So they have found a way to take and do that job in an area that I think is even more difficult, because you're not only just rating the actual word content of a movie, but you're also making some kind of a qualitative judgment about what's actually seen on the screen. I think your job is easier. I think, in fact, and in a sense, you're saying that because you've already admitted that point when you've said here that you're going to draw the line in terms of disclosure at the point at which explicit lyrics are used, your choice of words. So it seems to me that in light of that, it's really quite easy to establish for yourself an industry-wide standard and expect that others in the industry will adhere to that standard. And I would be frank to say to you, if you do that, I think that would be a helpful step. And if somebody didn't want to, somebody in the industry basically didn't want to adhere to that, then I think the industry, the remaining companies, have some obligation to differentiate themselves from whoever that might be. And again, I think that to the extent that you can do this among yourselves, that's a far better way to try to have this done. Frankly, the examples we've heard today are the most extreme examples. Obviously, the ones that were cited earlier in terms of violence or incest or suicide or what have you, that the most extreme examples that are out there today are the ones that are used to illustrate the problem. But I think almost everybody that's thoughtful is troubled by that, troubled by those extreme examples, and I think at the very least we ought to have a way of being fully informed about them so that parents are in a stronger position, and for that matter young people for themselves in their own behalf are in a better position to try to make some kind of a qualitative judgment. So I think you've taken a step here, but I think you can go somewhat further on your own, and I think it would be constructive to have you do so.
May I respond?
Please.
Please understand several things about the application of lyrics on the outside, say, of an album jacket. I repeat that these lyrics are owned by music publishers, not record companies. The right to reproduce has to come from that. In some cases, it would be easy. In a given album, there could be as many as 10 different music publishers represented. Rights may therefore come from 8 of them or 9 of them, or not from the one that is the key one. If such lyrics were exposed on the outside, and those lyrics tend to be...
I'm not saying that they ought to be on the outside, but they ought to be such that if somebody's going to buy the album, I mean, maybe it's a fold-open album, they can open it and take a look at it.
But all albums are shrink-wrapped with plastic, and they would have to be on the outside or would not be visible, which raises another question. If questionable lyrics that are protested here, such as those protested here today, were printed on the outside of an album, would we be again castigated by parents for daring to expose such explicit language to their younger children, and maybe be hauled before a committee to have to explain ourselves for daring to reveal such objectionable material?
Look, let me tell you something. I think there's a way to solve that problem, and there are probably a lot of different ways to solve it. Just in terms of what comes to mind, I realize the way records come now, but you could certainly have two sides to. You could have a paneled container and the records on one side, and I've seen them like that. I own some myself. It's a matter of cost. It's not a matter of the fact that you can't do it. And I guess what I'd like to establish with you, I think you're a lot better off once you've decided that explicit lyrics are there to make the full disclosure. And I think you should do that. I don't think you should fight it. I think you should find the most efficient way to do it so that people have the information to make a competent judgment. I think you're on a lot sounder ground if you do that than if you're reluctant about it for basically reasons of cost or inconvenience.
Mr. Gortikov, I just wanted to correct one statement that you made. You referred to being hauled before a committee. You weren't hauled before this committee. You
I didn't say that I was.
To come here.
No, sir, I did not say that I was.
You're here voluntarily, right?
Yeah, I was talking in the future.
Well, we don't haul people before committees, at least this committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, we have a panel. Dr. Joe Steussy, University of Texas at San Antonio, and Dr. Paul King, Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh, it's 125. That was 20. I see.
Dr. Steussy, would you proceed, please?
Mr. Chairman, Senators, and guests, thank you for allowing me to make a few remarks. I have submitted a substantial written testimony. I hope you'll take the chance to read it because my 5-minute speech will be rather brief and just try to hit the main topics. The substantiation is in the written documentation. Let me see if I can convey to you what we know from the field of music psychology about music and its interrelationship with people. I should say that I am on the music faculty of the University of Texas at San Antonio, hold a PhD in music, and have taught a course in the history of rock music for 12 years at 2 universities. The first thing we know is that music affects behavior. Many children will say, I listen to that stuff, but it doesn't affect me. In fact, Mr. Snider made exactly those words earlier today. He said, it doesn't affect me. We've known intuitively for centuries, and it's been proven conclusively by scientific studies in recent decades that music does affect behavior. Music affects our moods, emotions, attitudes, and our resultant behavior. Music affects us psychologically and physiologically. This fact explains why we have choirs and organs at church, why we have bands at football games, music in stores, business offices, and doctors' offices. It explains why there are military marches, discotheques, music behind movies and TV, jazzercise, and most importantly, commercial jingles. We know some other things about the way music interacts with people. We know that music is an aid to verbal retention. Any verbal message that you receive, you're more likely to remember it if it's in a musical context. We also know that repetition increases our preference for that which is repeated. The more we hear things, the more likely we are to internalize it and like it. We also know that coordinated multisensory input reinforces music's message. The more senses that can be involved in receiving a coordinated message, the more likely that message is to impact upon our conscious and subconscious. Although this next point may seem contradictory to the previous one, it's really not. And that is that there's such a thing as exclusionary input. That is to say, input which blocks out all other inputs, removes distractions. We also know that exclusionary input impacts the mind with the message that's being received. Today's heavy metal music is categorically different from previous forms of popular music. It contains the element of hatred, a meanness of spirit. Its principal themes are, as you've already heard, extreme violence, extreme rebellion, substance abuse, sexual promiscuity and perversion, and Satanism. I know personally of no form of popular music before which has had as one of its central elements the element of hatred. The message may be either overt or covert. In the case of the overt message, we're talking, of course, about a message which is being reinforced by music, something we say increases that impact. It's being reinforced by repetition, primary and secondary repetition. Primary meaning within the same song, a given hook line is repeated as many times as 30 or 40 times in a 3 or 4 minute span. Secondary repetition because frequently the words are very difficult to understand. Typically the teenager will listen repetitively over and over and over to understand the words and frequently be able to transcribe them. The message is reinforced by multisensory inputs, such as the album covers, which have been discussed, the looks of the performers, their theatrics on stage, the visual representations such as MTV, volume levels, etc. And the message is reinforced in individual headphone listening, which is the type of exclusionary listening that I referred to earlier. The message may also be covert or subliminal. Sometimes subaudible tracks are mixed in underneath other louder tracks. These are heard by the subconscious but not the conscious mind. Sometimes the messages are audible but are backwards, called backmasking. There is disagreement among experts regarding the effectiveness of subliminals. We need more research on that. We hear frequently about the First Amendment problem. In closing, I would say that while we must protect our First Amendment freedoms, we must also protect minors from the abuse of those freedoms. The First Amendment, as I understand it, is not a blank check. There are legal constitutional limitations when we feel that the abuse or the use of a freedom negatively impacts the health of another segment of society. Use of the airwaves for pornography and immoral purposes, especially when aimed at minors, must be controlled somehow. Given the American philosophy, I think we've given the so-called creative artist a wide berth. We have given them more than the proverbial inch, and I believe they've taken more than the proverbial mile. Somehow we must send a message to the recording and radio industry: enough is enough. You've gone too far. Parents are fighting the scourge all over the country. We plead for help from city councils, radio stations, advertisers, and the record industry itself. I hope that this committee will find a way to send a message to the industry. Clean up your act, or we will do it for you. In the words of the heavy metal band Twisted Sister, we're not going to take it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Payne?
My name is Paul King, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I treat kids with serious drug problems. I've been treating adolescents for 9 years and have taught. I've been treating adolescents for over 9 years and have formerly also been a New York City high school teacher. So I've been working with teenagers for over 14 years now. The kids that I treat, some are delinquent, some are suicidal, others are violent, even homicidal. Many are sexually promiscuous. Nearly all of my patients worship heavy metal music. My comments are not really my own, but reflect what I have learned from the kids that I see each and every day in my practice. I'd like to talk about two. One is to answer the question about whether music influences young people or not, and the other is the issue about parents and the type of guidance and what is the nature of sufficient guidance for parents in this issue. With the aid of sophisticated marketing techniques, entertainers are elevated to the role of deities, to be worshipped by youth as if they are gods. Long hours are spent listening to heavy metal rock music, with some performers portraying themselves as charismatic leaders. The young person may then identify with the words of the song. You have given me a new belief. Belief has religious connotations, and soon the world will love you, Sweet Leaf. Sweet Leaf by Black Sabbath, Warner Brothers Records. Adolescents tell me Sweet Leaf refers to marijuana. Rebellion and hate are common themes. Children of the Grave by Black Sabbath. Revolution on their minds, the children march against the world they have to live in, oh, the hate that's in their hearts. The group leader is a preacher. The young person becomes involved with the lyrics, develops a belief system, internalizes a belief system based on those lyrics. Heavy metal refers to a type of music that was first developed in England. The music is loud and powerful, most of the strength coming from electric guitars. The makeup or facial expressions are either hateful or demonic, or have symbols and costumes representing power, which is the basic core issue. Examples: facial painting in what Kiss used to wear, tattoos of snarling animals, black leather chains, motorcycles. We've seen examples. Members of the group Motley Crue wear pentagrams. Verbal overtures are extremely philosophical. Let me give you a few examples. The Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden, which is Zomber Enterprises, and it goes, "Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. His number is 666, which comes to 666, referring from the beasts that are from Revelations. Young people, shout at the devil. It has a prologue. It's not even the music. It is a prologue with a very clear message. The idea is so that could be clearly listened to. In the beginning, the court of good always overpowered the evils of all man's sins. But in times the nations grew weak and our cities fell to slums while evil stood strong. In the dust of hell lurked the blackest of hate, for he who men fear awaits you." The heavy metal groups themselves state that this is all in fun and that they're not into Satan worship. Whether this is true or not is not important. Young people feeling inadequate have an instant sense of power from the music and identification closely with the lyrics. Heavy metal portrays the power and glory of evil. Adolescents with emotional and/or drug problems, which I treat every day, become further involved in delinquent behavior, violence, acts of cruelty, and Satan worship. The glamorization of violence, sex, and drugs leads to further problems with directing young people's attitudes. Obviously, as a child psychiatrist, that's what I do, is try to help direct young people's attitudes and direct parents. As Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue said in Hit Parader, "We like to live life to the fullest, and that means driving your car into the wall at 70 miles per hour or doing 3 chicks at once. That's okay with us." In describing their form of music, yeah, apple pie, Chevrolet, tight jeans, Motley Crue, pizza and drugs and sex. What's missing in today's teenagers identifying so strongly with heavy metal music? The music represents power, and the lyrics give purpose and meaning to those who have not been able to identify with the values they were raised with. Drugs and alcohol are often used while listening to heavy metal in order to feel the power more acutely and escape into the fantasies that are vividly portrayed on MTV. Escape alone is just harmless, but drug-induced altered states of consciousness, combined with the message of hatred and violence in heavy metal, is dangerous. There are problems in attitude, changes of thinking, and new values develop. 83% of my patients have been listening to heavy metal for several hours per day, and over 50% know the words and write them down. And in fact, they do that in school. Write down the words of the lyrics. The drugs make the youngsters suggestible to the message of the song. This is especially true with psychedelic, mood-altering drugs, LSD, PCP, and marijuana. Heavy metal is presented to kids as a religion. The adolescents are vulnerable because their sense of identity has not been formed. Their sense of meaning and purpose in life is missing. They sense in themselves the need to rebel. The topics are sex, violence, and the power of evil. The emotional hunger in these young people is met in the form of music, chemical use, and promiscuous sexual behavior. The crazier, the better. One of the most pathological forms of evil is in the form of a cult killer or deranged person who believes it's okay to hurt others or to kill. The son of Sam, who killed 8 people in New York, was allegedly into Black Sabbath's music. Ricky Queso, the teenager in Long Island who stabbed his friend, took out his eyes, and then hung himself, followed Black Sabbath and Judas Priest. That's in Rolling Stones in November of '84, where they interviewed the kids that were at the funeral. Most recently, the individual identified by the newspapers as the Night Stalker has been said to be into hard drugs and the music of the heavy metal band AC/DC. This is not to say that the music made them into killers, but that in their insane, drug-crazed thinking, identification strongly with the lyrics of the songs, I see the same process in my work with chemically dependent and hateful teenagers. Every teenager who listens to heavy metal certainly does not become a killer. Young people who are seeking power over others through identification with the power of evil find a close identification. The lyrics become a philosophy of life. It becomes a religion. Young people in our treatment program recovering from drug problems, we ask them to give up heavy metal for at least a year so that they're not again overtaken by feelings of resentment, hate, and the urge to party. Partying, which teens identify as a combination of drug use and hard rock music, is a strong stimulus to go back to that Highway to Hell, which is a AC/DC song. Young teens who already think too much with their hormones and too little with their heads succumb to heavy metal bombardment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. One 16-year-old music listener said to me, in fact, she's my daughter, you know, I really don't pay very much attention to the words. And my concern, said she, with labeling is that a label would simply underscore the fact that there are words here that really should be listened to, and that therefore, said she, labeling can make the situation worse, not better. Do you think she has a good point or not?
I think she has a point there. Frequently, that can, in fact, be the case. I think it's a matter of, in every way we can think of, communicating to the record industry and related industries, whether it's through labeling, whether it's through ordinances, such as are being considered today in San Antonio and other places. But like I say, we're not going to take this anymore. Do something. Clean up your act. Many of the problems that Mr. Gortikov related just a few moments ago about, well, we can't do this, and what if we print them, and then it's going to be pornographic. There's a very simple answer. Get off that stuff. Move on to something else. The industry itself creates the market for this.
Well, the industry could obviously stop making records that advocated the sort of